Recording in progress.
We're live, Mayor.
Thank you. I'd like to call to order this City Council meeting of July 6th, 2021. Before asking the clerk to call the roll call for tonight's program, or for regular meeting, is there a motion to excuse Deputy Mayor Arnold?
So moved. Second.
It's been moved by Councilmember Falcone, seconded by Councilmember Curtis, to excuse Deputy Mayor Arnold this evening. Any comments? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion is approved. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Councilmember Nixon,
Here.
Councilmember Black,
Here.
Councilmember Curtis,
Here.
Councilmember Falcone,
Here.
Councilmember Pascal,
Here.
Mayor Sweet.
Here, thank you. Our study session this evening is on Kirkland Zoning Code Chapter 19, Amendments Related to Tree Management. We expect to reconvene our regular meeting at approximately 7:30. City Manager.
Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor. So I just want to read a brief overview of what we're going to do today. As the Mayor described, the subject of tonight's study session is staff recommendations on policy question that will inform future tree code revisions. These revisions are going to come to a future council meeting. As you know, study sessions are not decision-making meetings, so staff will present each recommendation, and we're going to be seeking questions, comments, and feedback from the council on the recommendations. Staff will use the feedback from the study session, from previous council meetings and retreats, as well as the written responses each council member provided to the staff to inform the draft revisions for a future council meeting for discussion and decision. Each of the council responses received have been compiled into a summary matrix, which will be sent to the council after your conversation and the study session tonight is concluded. So with that, Madam Mayor, as an overview, we have Jeremy McMahon, the Deputy Planning Director, and Deb Powers, our Urban Forester, here to make the presentation.
Welcome, Jeremy. Deb, proceed.
Let's see, good evening. Can everybody see the screen?
We had it and then we lost
the
it.
By now.
Here it comes. We
Okay.
got it.
Thank you, City Manager Triplett, and Madam Mayor, Deputy Mayor, council members. We're pleased to resume our discussion on amendments to the tree code, Kirkland Zoning Code Chapter 95. We have 18 slides and we're focused on the 12 questions that were posed at the May 18th City Council meeting for your consideration in advance of this meeting. Okay. So we'll walk through each of the 12 high-level policy questions that were presented in the memo and pause after each one and allow an opportunity for council discussion as City Manager Triplett described, looking for a summary, and then we'll get to next steps, hopefully. By high-level approach, we mean we're looking for ultimately council's desired outcome of what you want the tree code to do. We looked at or considered various effects of the key points that we'll talk about tonight. That's the purpose of attachment 1. And with those various effects and council's summary weighing in on this, we'll be able to get a general policy framework that would lead to a draft code. You're not meant to read this. It's just to describe in terms of what you want the code to do and what that means. In the memo and all through attachment 1, we talked about the 3 R's of urban forest management. That's retention, removal, replanting. And the policy direction and the effects that we're talking about were summarized in a chart form in attachment 1 with the arrow up, arrow down. And then we also looked at immediate versus long-term effects. And we looked at the 3 R's and put that in a summarized form in the chart in attachment 1 in terms of arrow ups or arrows down. And the arrow up meant more retention, more tree planting, and less tree removal. And the arrow down was the opposite, more removal, less retention, and less planting. And just for the graphics sake, the blue dash line here is the current code, which was a baseline for comparison to various policy direction options so that we came up with the effects, what each of those effects were. And as council knows, that finding the balance, that's the right balance for this community of those 3 R's, is what makes the tree code so challenging. And as far as the community goals, this was the community visioning exercise, the Wordle in the shape of the city of Kirkland, with the words that came out predominantly in that visioning exercise that are circled in red, and the scope of the original scope of the tree code update, which we talk about in the memo. So we'll get right down to it. Is that approach okay and agreeable with everyone?
Looks like it is.
Okay. So the first question is, does the current code need a major update as proposed or minor amendments such as adjusting definitions and code clarifications? The staff recommendation was on the side of minor code updates and a few moderate adjustments to the code with clarifications and improved definitions. With that, I'll open it to council discussion.
Council discussion.
Councilmember Nixon.
Oh, thank you. Councilmember Nixon. Toby, you're muted.
For some reason, it was bouncing, and every time I'd click it, it would actually click it twice. Okay, I think I'm unmuted now. So my feeling is that the updates need to be more significant. In particular, I very much want to see more respect for property rights, that the owners of land and of the trees get to make the decisions about what happens on their property, with few exceptions like wetlands and steep slopes where removal could endanger others. My preference would be that we don't make aesthetic preferences or concerns over climate change the overriding concern, and that the rights of property owners don't matter. I think that there should be more freedom for property owners to decide what they want to do with their land in terms of gardens or solar panels or pools or whatever it might be, and that it shouldn't be up to the city to take on the role of sovereign and decide for people what they can and can't do with their land. And so I think there are more significant changes needed.
Thank you. Just to let you know, my internet connection is a little wobbly tonight, so I didn't get a lot of that. If anybody needs to interrupt me or if you can't hear me, just let me know. Via chat, I suspect. Any other discussion on this particular question? Councilmember Curtis.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, no surprise. Councilmember Nixon and I are probably polar opposites on that, respectfully. But I also feel like we are looking at, I mean, I agree that clarifying and defining the code and making it easy to follow and understand is crucially important. And if those are minor adjustments, that's it. But I personally, as we go through this discussion, will be interested in talking about landmark trees, mitigation, allowing property owners to do what they want with mitigation, and climate change. So council member and I both agree that these are major changes, but maybe we disagree on the final outcome.
Thank you. Councilmember Pascal.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, it's tough because what do you consider major or moderate? It's kind of in the eye of the beholder. Things that I'm thinking about are things, perhaps major changes related to replantings or mitigation for tree removal. I think the IDP citywide is something that I'm interested in, and I would consider that a major change. So those are a couple things. And then obviously, I think I agree with staff about the landmark tree status. I think that's probably something that would be a major change that we need to talk through. So besides that, I guess, then everything else in my mind would be more moderate. But it all adds up to being major, I guess.
Any further discussion? I'm just going to add a comment. This question leading into it, I hated this question because I had to do the rest of the survey before I came back to this question. And I think the way that I answered it was basically minor or maybe it was the next question. Anyway, I agree that there are some major issues that we're going to end up dealing with, and there are some minor issues that we're going to end up dealing with. So I don't know whether that equals moderate or not. I think it's actually the next questions that are going to really help to fill this blank in. You have what you need, Deb?
I think I did. In summary, it sounds like there is no one direction, minor, moderate. It sounds like a mix.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So I think, Madam Mayor, just to clarify, the staff recommendation did suggest that it would include a major focus on landmark trees as well as the
Right.
minor. So it sounds like after we have the answer from each of the other questions, we can get a sense of how much the code needs a major fix and how much needs just a minor or moderate.
Great. Proceed, Deb.
Okay. So this is probably is broad, but it's the question on what is council's desired outcome from an amended tree code.
Councilmember Black.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. Yeah, I'll go first on this one. And I think I mentioned this last time we talked about the tree code. I'm sort of reminded that the 2013 Urban Forestry Management Plan really, well, one, to partly answer the previous question, it didn't really talk about major updates. It talked about the need to achieve or to tackle a couple of specific areas to improve the tree code. One was to clarify it, to ensure that it was predictable and it had reproducible outcomes, no matter who was looking at the code, whether it was our planners or whether it was a homeowner or whether it was developers. Another goal stated in the 2013 Urban Forestry Management Plan was to simplify the code and to ensure that it was accessible to everyone who might need to access it, including those same people I just listed. And then also there are certain polarizing elements of it. And I think, one of the reasons we've struggled everyone who works with the tree code struggles is because the inherent tensions that are, the tensions that are inherent in the code. And so another goal was to resolve the polarizing elements. So, to a reasonable degree, I'd like to see us resolve those aspects of the code that the 2013 management plan and the 2019 stakeholder process identified as most polarizing, to the extent that's reasonable and can be achieved. And then, the 2013 plan also stated the overarching goal was to have a code, whether updated or not, that helped achieve the goal of a 40% tree canopy, an aspirational goal, certainly, but there's certainly a goal worth pursuing and one that we've established as a council of the city. But one thing I would note, and this has been noted by many people who've commented, is that, including the folks who, some of whom are on this council, who helped develop the 2013 management plan, which is that the code is just one part of a larger viable plan by the city to achieve and sustain the goal of 40% tree canopy, and it can't really be viewed apart from all the other strategies and efforts that the city is making and can devote more attention to retain, place, replant, and monitor the health of trees. So I really see it as just one small part. I guess my point is achieve those specific goals that I mentioned before, and then know that it is just one small part of a larger plan that we need to undertake. I agree with the staff's recommendation concerning greater protection for landmark trees, which we're going to no doubt talk about further. I also wanted to make a point, speaking about desired outcomes, an emphasis on native species, although the staff's point concerning species diversity in the memo is certainly well taken. But I kind of understand the staff's position as being one where species diversity together with a prioritization of native species are not mutually exclusive, and that both of those can be stated goals or outcomes for the code. So I think that's where I'm at, and I will hand over the floor to my colleagues.
Thank you. Councilmember Falcone.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, I agree with a lot of what's been said so far. My overall lens for these tree code updates is really to achieve our SMP goal of the 40% tree canopy. Like Councilmember Black said, I think that's really important that we keep that as our focus and our lens, since that's a really important goal to our community for a variety of reasons. And secondarily to that, also having, diversity of age and species. But that said, I think, we need to have a balance of the 3 R's that you mentioned. Like Councilmember Nixon said, I think it's also important to balance it with individual property owners' rights, so that folks don't feel so restricted on their property that they're not able to do things that they want to do, which is why, having a reasonable balance of the 3 R's, I think is really important, so that folks can replant, like Councilmember Curtis said, that there are mitigation efforts so that folks have the flexibility to do what they want on their property. So for me, I think my purpose in wanting to do this, examine this, is to look towards the 40% canopy goal, again, with diversity in mind, but also while balancing those 3 R's that you mentioned, being reasonable. Perhaps that's a 4th R, reasonableness with balancing the 3 R's.
Thank you. Councilmember Nixon.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, I think what we've been hearing is that the desired outcome is different depending on what phase we're in, right? My feeling is that the overriding concern for developers is predictability, because they need to be able to value the property based on what they can build on it. And we could have fairly aggressive requirements. I'm not necessarily advocating for that, but we could have fairly aggressive requirements for tree retention, as long as they can make the same calculation that city staff makes, and they don't have to go back and forth with city staff 3 or 4 or 5 times, burning, dollars on redrawing plans. They should be able to go in and know the first time they assess a property for potential purchase, what trees would have to be kept, without without a lot of subjectivity based on the staff's analysis. So that's number one. But for the individual property owners, I feel very strongly that the focus needs to be on allowing them to do what they want to do. And currently our regulations are very rigid. Like, you can take out 2 significant trees a year and that's basically it. And it's not easy to get permission to take out more, even if you want to do an all-up plan for, you're going to take out several here, you're going to plant several there. We just don't accommodate that very well. We have this concept of a forest management plan, but you have to have more than an acre before that kicks in. And I think we need to have the ability for individual homeowners to be able to present that kind of a multi-year plan, that they'll take out multiple trees at one time now because they want to do something, and that they'll replace them in some way and not have it just be limited to a certain number per year. I also feel very strongly that we need to have different accommodations based on lot size, not just 2 is the maximum or 2 is the minimum on a lot and 2 per year. That might make sense for a 1/4 acre lot, but that might not make sense for a 1 acre lot. So these things need to be scaled based on lot size, which we don't do today. So I'd like to see more flexibility on the side of homeowners and more predictability on the side of development. And I'll add one more thing, and that is, I think we need to do a good job of establishing the policies for what the city itself is going to do on publicly owned property. I don't think we go far enough in that right now, to make sure that we have regulations that the city is required to comply with and goals that the city is required to comply with. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Pascal.
Thank you. Yeah, this is a tough question. I think my views on this have changed over time as we've learned more and had more discussion. And I think it comes back to the fact that definitely want to see the tree canopy preserved and meet our goals. But I think it comes down to kind of originally it was about trying to balance the development side with tree retention. And one of the things I was looking at originally from this was a little bit more ways in which we can protect good trees as part of the development scenario, where we continue to receive input from the community that, under a development scenario, trees are just essentially cut down. And we've seen several examples of that recently. And so I was interested in trying to figure out a way to balance that and to figure out how to save a few more trees internal to the site as opposed to external, and simplify the code, make it easier to use, make it more predictable. But we have all these things that are kind of in tension, and I'm struggling with how that all works together. And I think it's very difficult to write code that's predictable and takes the subjectivity out of it. That's the bottom line. I think there's always going to have to be some subjectivity, right or wrong, because we're dealing with things that just don't all fit into a certain matrix, tree locations, development plans, where the utilities are located, the topography of the site, the geometric shape of the property. There's so many different things that go into it that I think it's what I've come to realize is completely unrealistic to just have a simple code that's completely predictable.
Thank you. Further discussion? I think for the most part, it looks like folks feel like we've answered it. I'm going to pile on to the 40%. What I want in a general policy framework is win-wins. So I think there has to be a very balanced, if somebody's going to take out a landmark tree, then I think they need to mitigate it significantly. And how we get there, I think the way I answered this question was I wanted it to be simple and doable for developers and homeowners alike. But I think to Councilmember Pascal's comments, that's probably not possible unless every lot in the city was the same shape, size, all the rest of it. Anyway, anybody else? Deb, do you have what you need?
I do. I think this question probably, is like the other one, but we might need to circle back to it. Moving on to the third question, which is, does council feel the problems with the current tree code are related to trees lost with development or private property tree removals? And staff recommendations on that is that considering that both tree removal scenarios are linked to the loss of tree canopy cover, and given that both the limitations of increasing tree retention on development sites and the desire to allow tree removals in proportion to property size, what Councilmember Nixon had just brought up, the updated code should aim to both maximize tree retention on development sites and limit property owner tree removals with proportional changes based on property size to meet canopy cover goals.
Who wants to shoot first? Councilmember Pascal.
Yeah. So yeah, my feelings have changed on this over time. I think originally before we had increased fines, I did have a greater focus on the private property tree removals. Since then, since we made progress on increasing fines, I'm not interested in putting more restrictive regulations on the private property owners that are removing 1 or 2 trees a year. I think that's fairly restrictive today, and I'm not saying to loosen it, and I'm not saying to make it more rigid for them at this point. So that's kind of where I'm at on that side. So I think the opportunities in my mind are on the development scenario side, like I said earlier. And then, I think when you think about the private property tree removal, it does come down to enforcement though. So we do have fines, we've increased those. I think where we have some room to improve is how do we address that illegal tree removal? And I think that's where we're seeing some of it, but we don't have really good data on the private property side. So that would be interesting to understand a little bit more, but I think it's really around seeing how we can not just preserve trees during the course of development, but make sure that those trees aren't damaged and then die later during the development situation. So that's the other piece of it.
Thank you. Councilmember Nixon?
Well, my answer to this question is both. But for me, the higher priority is development, because if you just look at the volume of email and social media messages we see, that's what the community is most concerned about. And whether it can be addressed to the level that they seem to want it to be addressed, without hindering the ability to create more housing, I think is the really tough issue there. Every tree that we protect potentially is one less house that gets built. And I don't know that that's a good thing, although there are definitely people in our community who wish we wouldn't make any new houses. But I think that the area where we can do the most, and I would agree with Councilmember Pascal on this, is focusing on the development side and providing more flexibility on the private property side. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Curtis.
Thank you. I don't have a lot of new to add. What I was going to say, the same thing Councilmember Nixon said, is what we're hearing from the community is the concern about the trees removed on development. I think that's where our primary focus is. But there are issues on private property. And one thing I want to address that was said earlier is we had decided as a council to allow larger landholders to remove more trees per year. I don't disagree with that, but I feel like they should retain more trees also. Currently, we ask people to retain at least 2 trees on our property. If we are going to let you remove 4, you should retain 4. So I think that will help balance that down arrow on our graphic. Besides that, I agree with what's been said.
Thank you. Anybody else? Councilmember Black.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. So I think my colleagues have heard me say before, certainly initially, I really was hoping to find a disciplined way of distinguishing between the removal of trees by basically private property owners in the absence of any development, so the non-development scenario, distinguishing that in a disciplined way from owners of property in the development scenario. And I really think we've seen how challenging that really is to draw that distinction, at least in the way we've ordered our society today and the existing laws we have in place. And I think the staff signaled that to us a little bit in their analysis and in their memo, and I think that's fine. But I do think, as my colleagues have mentioned, there are ways in which we can administer our code and oversee the permitting process when there is in the development scenario. And also the way we approach those sort of other strategies that we plan to use, in concert with the code. I think there are ways that we can still prioritize the development scenario. And I would like this, and I guess what I'm saying is I'd really like my colleagues, I'd really like us, the staff, to sort of help us figure out how we can actually do that. So prioritize, when prioritization is the question, let's prioritize trees lost in the development scenario, and then protection of those significant healthy trees and groves that we're going to be talking about in some of the later discussion here.
Thank you. Again, I missed a lot of that. Can I just ask council, is anybody else having difficulty? Okay. Councilmember Nixon, if I disappear, you are the next senior, I think. So.
Yeah, you might consider calling in on your phone for audio and just drop the internet audio, and that might fix the problem.
Okay, I'll try that. So Deb, you have what you need on this one?
I'm not sure. I have that. It seems like there are problems with on the development side of trees lost or tree removal, and that allow more flexibility for private property. Is kind of a general a summary.
Okay, I'm going to just add a little bit, if you can hear me. I agree with what's been said so far. The one thing that we didn't talk about with this one is I really believe that we should have stronger replanting guidelines, both for replanting on a development site, with the development, and off-site.
Right. We'll talk about those at a next question.
Okay.
Or at a following question.
So are we done with this one?
Yes.
Maybe we need to give staff a little bit more guidance, actually. Does that sound right?
Councilmember Curtis? Sorry, Councilmember Black, I'll come back to you.
I was going to suggest, Deb, why don't we come back to this? Because I think in the further discussion, you'll maybe get more information. As an example, you talked about providing more flexibility for private homeowners. I'm open to more flexibility, but as the mayor just said, I would like to have replanting requirements and so forth. So I think that you'll get more information as we move forward.
Okay.
Councilmember Black.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That was just a thumbs up for Councilmember Curtis's comments.
Super.
Okay.
Okay, Deb.
So So I guess we're ready to go to the fourth question, and that is, does council want to provide more flexibility to property owners to remove more trees from their property? So it's a very focused question, focusing in on property owner tree removals. And staff recommendation on this is that it's kind of twofold. I don't know, Jeremy, did you want to weigh in on this?
No, I think it's really that the draft code is providing some flexibility, as council members have mentioned before, to remove more trees if you have a larger piece of property, to make it proportionate. So I think that's still a valid recommendation. We do have some concerns about the hedge removals in the draft code and potential abuse of those standards. We do think that there has to be some way of also controlling landmark tree removals or regulating landmark tree removals on private properties, and being somewhat conservative about the number of trees that can be removed in any given year. And as council members have talked about, at some point there's a threshold where a mitigation should be triggered. So whether that's removal of landmarks, as recommended by the Planning Commission, discussed by council earlier, or to exceed some amount of tree removal, that some mitigation requirements come along with that. And that mitigation, these questions all work in tandem. We'll come back and talk about mitigation more. Deb, anything to add to that?
No, that pretty much sums up from the staff recommendation on question 4.
Councilmember Nixon.
And I appreciate those things that Jeremy just talked about. The one thing that I'm not hearing is this multi-year plan capability. You know, for example, if I haven't removed any trees from my property in 5 years, should I be allowed to go back and say, well, now I can remove 5 years worth? Or should I be able to submit a plan that says, I want to remove 5 years of trees immediately in exchange for a commitment, a legal binding commitment to not remove any more in the next 5 years, you know, something like that, so that I can get a project done all at once instead of having to spread the tree removals over several years. That ability really doesn't exist right now. I would like to see that ability exist. So that's the one additional suggestion I have for flexibility. Thanks.
Councilmember Curtis.
I apologize for going first all the time, or second. See, this is where I think Councilmember Nixon and I are not that far apart. I'm willing to provide flexibility for private homeowners. They may want to build a garden shed and a swimming pool or a hot tub. They should be allowed to do that. But this is where we start talking about mitigation. If you're going to take out a hedge or a grove or a landmark tree, there needs to be some mitigation where you're replanting somewhere else on your property or paying fee in lieu. So again, it's like we're going to get to that later. This also goes back to the private property owner with larger properties. They should ultimately retain more trees on their property. And there's something that Councilmember just brought up is we're not tracking people removing trees. I recently removed 2 diseased apple trees, and I let the city know that I was taking them out. And you know, we should look at whether, even though we're going to let people take trees down, whether they should just report to us that they're taking them down so that we can track how many trees are removed. But I don't want to set that system up unless we have the resources to create a database and the people to manage it. So I think it's something that I'd like to talk about during this process or later on, is how we track removals. For example, in Councilmember Nixon's scenario, I told you I haven't removed 5 trees, so I should be allowed to remove 5 trees now, but is that true? So, you know, how do we keep track of that?
Great comments. Councilmember Falcone.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, I think this is one of those instances where, you know, the reasonableness that I mentioned earlier comes into play, right? And the balance of the 3 R's. And so I think that I agree with my fellow council members that property owners should have flexibility to be able to do things that they want to do on their property. But again, with a reasonable balance of, as the mayor mentioned, having a stronger, more comprehensive replanting and mitigation strategy for that, so that we are still able to provide that flexibility, but balance that with still keeping our eyes on the goal of the 40% tree canopy. And I think that's perfectly reasonable and something that we can achieve if we keep our eye on that goal by just having better mitigation measures required.
Councilmember Pascal.
I really am interested in what Councilmember Nixon has proposed related to allowing private property owners to submit a plan or do something of more significance to think, beyond just this year where you can remove 2 trees, and how would that work and what would be the requirements for that? Because that starts to get at that kind of more equal playing field in terms of a development scenario versus a private property scenario, where the development scenario, you're required to do that upfront thinking. That's why you can remove more. You're also beholden to greater plantings and other requirements. And so we hear that complaint from private property owners is that, you allow them to raise a lot more trees, and we can't do that. But they also are having to do a lot more work up front in really thinking through that and planning that out over time. And so if there is an opportunity to allow that type of scenario, I would be really interested in considering that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Black.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. I think this is also the time
Councilmember Black.
Can you hear me? No one can hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you. Maybe the mayor can't, though. Her video
Okay.
seems frozen right now.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll just quickly say, I think this is the time to also mention one of the, maybe not one of the polarizing elements, but one of the sort of perplexing elements of the code that was identified in the 2013 management plan, which is the, damaging and, for example, girdling trees and damaging trees in anticipation of upcoming development. So I appreciate the staff's recommendations in that regard. The incentive, the proposals for incentives to prevent that happening in this context of non-development tree removal. And so I throw that out there in case any of my colleagues disagree, but I think that's still part of the staff's proposal, and I'd like to see that continue in some fashion.
Thank you. Further discussion? Okay. Deb, have you got this one enough?
I do. I think what it sounds like that I've heard is in different variations that the private property owners that we're saying allow them to remove as many as they would like at any given time, and kind of bank that so that they could do that all at once and then have 5 years. Say if they used all of theirs up in 1 year, which would have taken otherwise 5 years, that they can't remove trees for 5 years, and come that 5th year or 6th year, then it shifts back to the typical removal allowance. Is that what I heard? Without saying specific code, but the premise of that.
Do I see anybody disagreeing with that? Councilmember Curtis.
I got really nervous when you said allow property owners to remove any tree that as many trees as they want. So I do think we need to use Councilmember Pascal's language, guardrails, on what that is. And again, let's don't leave out the part you can remove a certain number of trees, but you have to replant elsewhere on your property or do some sort of mitigation. I want to make sure that we don't lose that.
Right. So, okay. Any other comments?
Can I just make one, Deb, before we skip?
Absolutely.
I'm having a really tough time tracking what's happening. I just wanted to say that flexibility within reason, and I like the concept of having a plan and moving toward the IDP or whatever it is. But if somebody's going to do a major project, they should be able to do a combination of things. I really do believe that mitigation is warranted for over 2 or over 3, however we land. Anyway, Councilmember Curtis.
I apologize, but perhaps we keep the code as it is. You may remove 2 a year of your own volition, but if you have a special project and need to remove more, then that triggers some sort of plan that then will require mitigation, and the city has a little more participation in what happens on your property.
Oops, I apologize.
Okay. I think you've got it now. I'm getting all kinds of stuff going on here. On to question 5.
So should big or landmark trees, as we've discussed them, have higher retention standards on development sites than other trees? And conversely, should they be protected on non-development sites?
Can I clarify the question? I had trouble with this one. But is this large trees in setbacks or anywhere?
This is just the premise of should landmark trees be protected? So it's not specifically talking about setbacks. It's just saying as a standard on development sites, should they have a special or a higher protection than other trees or the significant trees? And then should on single family or with homeowner tree removals, should they be, same thing, protected above any other tree or significant tree? So in the 2 different scenarios, the question is really, should there be a higher protection or retention standard for landmark trees?
Councilmember Pascal.
So when we last talked about this, I felt like we were getting close to the landmark tree status. We had some difference of opinions about either the size or whether or not private property owners would be allowed to remove, how often they'd be able to remove a landmark tree. And I think those will still be issues that we have to address. But as far as having higher retention standards, yes, for those trees that are more significant and high value. But my issue though previously with the draft code that we have seen in the past was that we weren't treating development sites and the private property owner sites equally. We were saying private property owners, you were held to a much higher standard in keeping the landmark trees, but development scenarios, you still could basically remove all the landmark trees except if they're in setbacks. And I feel like there has to be those have to be more closely aligned, in my view. So that's where, and if so, then I'm open to understanding what that higher retention standards are, but I do think they need to be more aligned. Thank you.
Councilmember Nixon.
Yeah, and I kind of agree with Councilmember Pascal. I would focus on the development sites, particularly significant subdivisions, when it comes to considering tree size. Less so with non-development scenarios or small projects like solar panels or putting in a swimming pool or something like that. the problem is if you define development as anything that requires a permit, then you end up applying the development definitions to individual lots as well. And that's something that I think we need to clarify, is, you know, does development mean anything that requires a permit, or is it, you know, we're talking about building new structures? And so generally, I want to give the individual property owners, individual lot owners more flexibility. The key, again, for the subdivision developers is predictability. They just need to be able to know which trees are going to have to be kept. And they've told us many times that as long as they can make that assessment and know how much to pay for the property, they're okay. Thanks.
Further discussion, Councilmember Curtis.
I'm just going to say the same thing, and that landmark trees should be protected. If they need to be removed, we need to have mitigation efforts in place, and that's both for developers, private and public property.
Okay. If I could go back to the draft code, that we were at the point of saying 2 landmark trees could be removed at the same time. So that's not looking at, that's the same as the current code with property owner tree removals, and that they were identified on development, in the development scenario, with the new condition size, you know, with the new definitions. So we have another question about mitigation, but just on the protection side of things. Should development, or should landmark trees have a higher retention standard on development sites than other trees? And should they have a higher protection on non-development sites, which they don't with the current code, in addition to, and they don't in the draft code either.
Councilmember Curtis?
I'm sorry, I thought Deb was asking for further explanation, which I was just going to repeat what I just said. So never mind. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Go ahead, Deb.
Oops. Did I? Sorry. I don't know that there's enough direction there to start to develop a draft code or even a policy framework. So we'll have to narrow this down from all the options that we've talked about. Should we go on to the next question?
I see Councilmember Pascal.
Thank you. So it's hard because we don't have that proposed code in front of us that we last discussed, and it's been some months. But from what I recall, I thought that we were talking about something where you could remove a landmark tree, but you could only do so like every 2 or 4 years or something. I forget what that was, but it was something more significant than just a normal tree under the size threshold. So that's what I remember us talking about from the non-development scenario.
It was 2 at this, it could be 2 at the same time, and that there was a higher mitigation for the second one than the first one.
Oh, okay. I thought there was some timeline associated with it too, where then you couldn't remove any other trees for 2 or 3 years after that. So that's what I recall from our discussions last time for the landmark trees. But
right.
So,
we talked about the time limits if there were tree removal that happened prior to development, like short plat and subdivision. So there was a extended wait period after the tree removals prior to permit submittal. But the rate at which landmark trees, that was proposed landmark tree for property owner tree removal, was every 12 months. Up to 2 could be removed and we were talking about the mitigation being higher for the second one than the first one. So 2 per 12 months is the same rate as the current code.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Curtis, then Falcone.
Thank you. Deb, I'm looking at your staff recommendation in the packet, and I wrote a big check mark by it because I agreed with it. And in your staff recommendation, you weren't referring to the draft code, but you were specifically making a recommendation on how to manage landmark trees. Why don't you talk through that and let us give you feedback on your recommendation?
Right. So we're basically saying that landmark trees should be defined and assigned a new and high retention standard, which we've discussed that. And that standard is most likely to be effective at preserving these larger trees with larger single family properties over 15,000 square feet, and short plats and subdivisions. We're saying, require the IDP, which everyone's already weighed in on and agreed, and that the permit review process, retention decisions could be made early in the design phase with IDPs. And that in addition, the code should allow requiring clustering of lots and building sites, and that happens with the short plat and subdivision process. And that we also recommend that for multifamily developments that we require a pre-submittal meeting prior to the permit submittal. So that's our staff recommendation. And then we also say to limit landmark tree removal in non-development or the property owner tree removal scenario, and require a permit for their removal, because an allowance, as has been discussed tonight, is not an allowance, is a notification. It's not, there are no permit requirements. It's very difficult to track the allowances.
So my understanding of your staff recommendation, it doesn't address your question that you just asked us about being able to take out 2 landmark trees. So so I support your staff recommendation. In your mind, does that remove the draft code that we have in place now?
Well, it's adding to it. There's, we'll get into that with another question, but it's agreeing that yes, there should be higher retention standards on development sites, as there is in the draft code, and that it's not agreeing with the draft code to allow 2 property owner tree removals at the same time with mitigation.
Okay, and that was the point I wanted to get to. So your recommendation does not allow property owners to remove 2 landmark trees without mitigation.
Right.
And I support that. I think that, again, landmark trees should be protected. If they're removed, there should be mitigation.
So just on the property owner side of thing, yeah, could we continue that discussion around?
I saw Councilmember Falcone.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, Councilmember Curtis, you pretty much said what I was going to say. Is let's go back to the recommendations in the memo, because I know tonight's not to talk about a lot of those specifics, but I do want us to continue. Absolutely, yes, I believe that large trees should have higher retention standards, and I think that you've come up with some great recommendations for us to discuss. In addition to what the Councilmember Curtis just mentioned at the end, that more stricter mitigation standards for individual property owners removing landmark trees. So just echo that and throw my support around moving forward with this conversation on how to protect and retain more landmark trees, both on development and non-development sites.
And I'm going to disagree. Is there any other comment? I'm sorry. I'm going to disagree just to the degree that if we go back to a 2 tree limit, and all I have is big, huge landmark trees in my backyard and I want to put in a whatever, I think I should be able to remove the 2. Now, if I wanted to take out 3 trees, even landmark, then definitely mitigation. But if we're going to allow 2, I think it should include landmark. I think we're going to end up with some options, just guessing.
Yeah, and the question is, it goes back to that, what's the immediate and long-term result? You know, the immediate result is loss of canopy cover or tree removal, lots of tree removal. And the long-term result is with that mitigation. So that's the essence of the question is, should there be a short-term result of large tree removal at a certain rate for property owners, as long as that's another question, as long as there's mitigation, but we'll get the mitigation question coming up here.
You know, Deb, I think mitigation is actually involved in almost all of these questions.
Well, we're trying to understand how the code should work. It's like just a framework of the code. And there is the removal side of things, and there is the replanting, but like we said, that's a long-term effect. So in thinking about that, that's what we're trying to gauge is the short-term removal or increasing the removals. Is that okay if on the premise or in the promise that there will be the long-term effect of mitigation?
And I think what I'm hearing is we may need to come back with option on this also, Mayor Sweet. I think this is kind of where we were hung up pre-COVID last time we talked about the tree code, is this discrepancy on property owner tree removals, whether just the current 2 trees, regardless of size, should continue for property owners. That's option A. Option B, are there just some hard, fast rules that property owners can't remove landmark trees? Or option C is like, yes, you can remove them, but it's going to require significant mitigation. And we haven't defined what that significant mitigation, but you want to create a path through permitting and mitigation forward to allow those removals. So that's kind of it's really the 3 options of how the code's going to, or could be drafted. And
Thanks, Jeremy. I think that helps, folks. Any further discussion? Okay, on 6.
So this is just the discussion of on development sites, should the updated tree code require more retention? And staff's recommendation is that if council concurs that the updated code should result in the same tree retention as the current code, the following measures would apply, and that's broaden the revised grove definition to include trees between 6 to 12 inches in trunk diameter, consistent with the current code, and include fair condition trees with tier 2 tree retention to increase tree retention on development sites. That's consistent with the current code. So those are the differences in the draft code. That's what distinguishes the draft code from the current code. And then if council concurs that the updated code should result in increased tree retention on development sites than the current code allows, in addition to the previous measures, the following would apply. And then there are the additional standards, like adopt standards for landmark trees that we've discussed, slow the loss of canopy cover that was previously protected on development sites by limiting landmark tree removals after their 5-year maintenance agreements expire. So that's the look at tree removal on private property owner tree removal with limits instead of the 2 per 12 months, and mandate the IDP review process. And we have leveraged private and public resources with the city program for canopy restoration, as we've discussed with the Urban Forest 6-year work plan. So here the balance is, here we're looking at tree canopy, what's the effect that we want? What's the desired effect, or how we want the revised code to work?
Council? Councilmember Curtis.
I do support your recommendations, Deb, on the staff recommendation on number 6. I had a question about fair trees. It seems appropriate to retain fair trees, especially if it's going to help retain our canopy coverage. And on your graphic, I would like to see those down arrows. If they don't go up, at least that they're a negative impact. So I want to change that course. So I support your recommendations. As far as fair trees, in your professional assessment, fair trees on a piece of property that is being maintained, either private or public, they can become good trees with good maintenance and good care. Oftentimes fair trees, if they're not, well, even if they're diseased, but they can be elevated to good trees. Do you agree?
Generally, yes.
Okay.
I think also another thing to add to that is when we're thinking of groves, the fair condition trees in a grove have a different function for habitat. And, you know, when we talk about a cavity, that functions for wildlife habitat.
That's a really good point, and I'm glad you made it. It's not just about beautiful trees. It's providing habitat for the wildlife in our city, and that is birds and raccoons and squirrels and all kinds of things. So yes, I support your recommendations, and I support including fair trees. So thank you.
Councilmember Nixon.
So of course, my principled answer is less.
I'm sorry.
Oops.
Oops.
You know,
sorry.
there should be more ability for the property owner to make these decisions. But we're talking about, in this case, with development. And with development, the key issue is predictability. And the thing that kills predictability more often than not is the subjectivity of these tree assessments. Is it an excellent tree, a good tree, a fair tree, a poor tree? People have a hard time coming up with the same answer. And so, you know, my general feeling is it doesn't matter. Pick a rule, but it has to be objective. There has to be some unambiguous way to know which trees have to be kept. And if we can come up with a way to do that, then I'll be happy.
Mm-hmm. And then there are those condition ratings that are in the draft code that are very specific.
And so have we gotten feedback from the people who do these property assessments for acquisitions to see if they agree that those are clear, objective, and unambiguous?
Well, it's based on arborist standards, and then they're written so that they're in layman terms. So the question as it applies to developers, I guess, for feasibility, no, they haven't been tested.
So, you know, that's an area where I think we really need to do some outreach and find out this, and not just on that, that's one area, but, you know, is this going to be objective so that there's not going to be continual disputes between the staff and those who are trying to develop homes as to which trees have to be kept. And, you know, and I could go down that path a little further. How do disputes over the rating of trees get resolved? Do we have a process for that?
Well, with the property owner, tree removal is an appeal. Any permit is appealable.
So if the staff thinks that, these handful of trees have to be kept and they disagree, they don't think they meet the standard for being retained, they have to go through a formal hearing examiner appeal process to resolve that dispute.
Not with development. This is with property owner tree removal.
Oh, well, so the slide we're looking at is for development.
On the development side, that's why we have the peer review of the tree retention plan by our development review arborist. So say if we, the city, disagree with the development or with the permit applicant's arborist, they have a continued discussion on how the permit applicant's arborist came to their conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really between arborist to arborist.
I would just add to that, Councilmember Nixon, that also that's where Deb and I and other supervisors and staff have been involved in plenty of those over the years. So the development review arborist has the city's urban forester, who's Deb, as a support network. So site visits to review comparing arboricultural reports are required, or site visits are required. There are times where we all go out to the site and poke around at the trees and look at them together. I don't want to tarnish any reputation, but as with many professional opinions, you can find somebody who will support. If you want to get a tree removed, you can find somebody to support removing a tree. And you can get a recommendation that maybe it will look at and say, we just don't see what you're seeing. And in that case, the city would prevail. In the development scenario, the city would prevail on that. That doesn't happen very often. There's certainly disputes or discussions around them, but I've never seen that stop a development project.
Is there any mechanism for a developer who is thinking about buying a piece of property to make their assessment of what trees would have to be kept and have that be reviewed by the city arborist or others to get a preliminary opinion to see if their assessment would be agreed with before they spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on formal plans and that kind of thing?
Right. Well, that's in the last staff recommendation is why we're asking for a lot of those early in the plan tree retention decisions. And, I don't mean to be smug, but there are a lot of developers who know perfectly well what trees would be retained, and they're girdling them, to prevent having to comply with the tree code. So, but to answer your question, that's why we're trying to, we defined in the draft code the standards that apply. It's a professional standard, and the steps that apply to inspecting trees for their condition is a standard, a professional standard.
The mechanism we have now, Councilmember Nixon, is the pre-submittal meeting process. So specifically through an IDP pre-submittal, we'll ask that the arborists be in attendance. Typically it's arborists haven't attended pre-submittal meetings, but with an IDP, we ask that the applicant bring their arborist with their preliminary findings, and then the development review arborist can look at those at that very early stage of a development scenario and go over it. We don't have, if you are like a single family owner or something, we do have an over-the-counter pre-submittal meeting where we could do something similar, but we haven't articulated the kind of process I think you're thinking about. We haven't outlined that specifically in the code.
Okay, thanks.
Councilmember Falcone.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, I believe that the updated code should result in an increased tree retention on development sites. So I agree with both bullet point sets of recommendations in the staff memo. We've talked about wanting to achieve our 40% tree canopy goal as outlined in our sustainability master plan. And we've also talked tonight about wanting to offer more flexibility to individual property owners. Well, in order to have a balance, we need to do more to protect our tree canopy, because the current direction that we're going with, our current standards, our current policy, is that we're seeing a significant reduction in our tree canopy, almost at 10% over 10 years, and that's a problem. So we need to reverse that with these tree code amendments. And I think it's great to allow greater flexibility for individual property owners, along with some mitigation. But to your points earlier, Deb, about short versus long term, if we make these decisions that will continue to have us lose our tree canopy and even a rapid rate, then we're going to be losing tree canopy at a more rapid rate, right, than we already are, and it's already a problem. So we need to steer the ship in the other direction, and I think this is an opportunity to do so on development sites. As previously mentioned by some of my fellow council members, this is where we hear the highest number of complaints from residents, is seeing lots just clear cut for development. And it's also where, staff, I believe Debbie mentioned earlier that this is where we're seeing a significant amount of our tree canopy loss. So this, I believe, is an opportunity for us to do better and to help right the ship in the direction that we want to go in order to achieve our goal in the Sustainability Master Plan. So I support staff recommendations to increase tree retention. Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion. Councilmember Pascal.
Thank you. Yeah, I support the staff recommendation too, and both of them, both for the first part and the increased tree retention. There's a couple things though that I'd like to mention. In that, with increased retention during the development scenario, I think it needs to be coupled with increased inspection of how trees are protected during the development scenario, because it's quite easy to damage them. Particularly if they're not located in setback areas. So that would be something that I want to be sure is part of this. I very much support the IDP. I would like to see that under any condition, pretty much, citywide. And then this might be talked about elsewhere, I forget, but I think we have to, I'd like the public right-of-way trees to be looked at a little bit differently than trees on the private property side, in that there should be perhaps even greater retention for publicly owned trees.
Okay, further comment? Well, I'm going to just be difficult here. I agree with the concept that this presents in terms of increasing tree retention. However, if the trees that are intended to be kept are not of either a species or of that is going to be complementary, say, to my development, because I've seen us indicate to landowners and to developers the requirement to save some pretty ugly looking trees, and I think there should be some leeway so that, for every one of those extra trees I take out, I need to plant another tree. So I don't know how, it sounds like another option you're going to have to build in there, but my ultimate goal is to strive to maintain that 40%, or to get back to that 40%, or wherever we are. But I still want the freedom to build, if I'm building a small neighborhood, to put trees where I want to put trees. Ultimately, I want my goal to be more trees rather than fewer trees. Okay, Deb, how many questions have we got left?
4, 5, 4.
Okay, so we're not done yet, so let's keep going.
So we kind of touched on this, and this is another sort of core of trees and development and retention. So in addition to unavoidable tree removal with development, so that's the tree that's within the building envelope, smack in the middle of the proposed house, should some or all remaining trees be allowed to be removed if they're mitigated? And that's, in other words, should should tree retention be waived if removed trees are mitigated? And the staff recommendation on that is, we're back to what was just discussed, is to slow the loss of canopy cover citywide. Staff does not recommend allowing the removal of trees that would be candidates for retention from development sites. And there's, we could provide ongoing education around new tree planting and landscape management, improve public tree maintenance, and implement tree planting programs applicable to public and private property.
Councilmember Curtis.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I strongly feel that we should not remove all trees from a development site. And that goes back to our earlier conversation of biodiversity and needing to have differences in ages and species so that our forest is healthy as possible. We're going to talk about tree credits hopefully tonight. And I am supportive of providing developers flexibility, but I see no reason and no upside to removing every tree from the property. And I do hear you, Madam Mayor, as fellow gardener. We don't want those unsightly trees, but trees can be managed, trees can be pruned, trees can be improved, other trees can be planted to screen this supposedly ugly tree. So I think there's some workaround, but I feel really strongly that we shouldn't be removing all trees from a site.
Further discussion? I stand by my previous comment. Councilmember Nixon.
Well, just real quick, I actually see the word all here as pejorative, right? I don't think anybody's proposing that in a development situation, any of us supports all trees being removed from a site. But we have to recognize in many cases, it's not just a question of making it easier to do construction. In some cases, it's a question of how many homes are able to be built and the huge shortage of homes that we have in our area. And how do we balance that to allow homes to be built for the people who need them and try to get the price down? Anyway, that was the comment I wanted to make, is I don't think anybody is advocating for all.
Oh, it's some or all.
Good catch. Further discussion? So I think I heard two options.
Okay, we'll move to question 8 then. Does the council prefer certain mitigation options for trees removed on development sites? And we do throw out, there's a number of options there with on-site tree replanting, off-site replanting supported by fees in lieu of planting. And that's like the city forestry account that's currently in place. And then off-site replanting in specified locations using a formal tree banking system or other mitigation options. And the difference between the city forestry account and, say, a tree bank is it's an entire program, kind of like how wetlands mitigation works, where there's capital projects that are the areas where the wetlands will be offset or restored from the wetlands that are mitigated through development. Same thing with trees. It's like tree removal from a development site then would go towards a banked property offsite. And staff's recommendation is to continue to mitigate trees lost through development on private property through on-site tree retention and replanting. And we're working with legal right now with the dedicated funding and how that would work with tree banking. And so we're exploring that. But this question is kind of laying out all the options to ask council if there's clearly any one or another.
Councilmember Nixon.
So my feeling is all of the above. Provide as much flexibility as possible within what the law allows. One thing that I'm not sure I'm seeing here, unless it fits under the tree banking, is the ability for developers in particular to buy other properties and donate them to the city for perpetual protection as green belts. And so if I was, going to develop 10 acres, if there even is a 10-acre site left in the city, and I would have been required to have left 2 or 3 acres of it as trees, could I buy another area somewhere else in the city that was 2 or 3 acres, or maybe multiple sites, and donate those to the city for protection of the trees that are on those sites? Have we considered something like that, or is that kind of what tree banking is? It seems like that's kind of what the transfer of development rights system kind of is.
Legal can weigh in. Oh, did you want to go ahead, Jeremy?
Yeah, if I could take a shot at that first. The current tree code, as Deb mentioned in the memo, has a lot of flexibility. It has obviously not stopped development in Kirkland. And it does to some extent guarantee you certain property rights. So it's never resulted, to my knowledge, in less lots or not being able to build a single family home on a lot. So when you get to a fee in lieu structure or something that would make it lucrative to do something like you're suggesting, Councilmember Nixon, you really have to be significantly hampering somebody's development rights that would make them think that it made more financial sense to build what they wanted here and mitigate that by buying a piece of property someplace else, which would be really expensive in Kirkland, right?
Yeah.
But I just don't think that the current code would ever force a developer to go through that machination.
Further discussion.
I'm sorry, I'm just going to complicate it a little bit further before we pick up. But so the current code has the tree credit planting standards, right? So you have, say you've got a 7,200 square foot lot, you've got to end up, even if you have a lot with no trees on it, you have to have 5 credits or maybe plant 5 trees at the end of the day, which is a fairly low standard. So in most cases, the developer will just choose to plant those 5 trees on site. And some of the other topics the council's talked about, like a landmark tree mitigation standard or increasing the planting required on a piece of property or something like that, that might drive a developer to choose an offsite option, which would be the banking or the fee in lieu or something like that.
Okay, further discussion. I guess the comment that I would add is what worries me about a formal tree banking system is that a system that we would trap ourselves into a process that would take far more resources to maintain. I don't want to develop a system that it's that whole issue of, do we have a catalog of what our canopy is now? And I think it goes back to a comment that Councilmember Curtis made earlier. We need to know what we have and what we lose on a regular basis. And we don't have that now. So I'm not sure what a formal tree banking system would entail in terms of resources.
Right. Yeah, that's significant thought about that too, because it's a whole program where not only the administration of it, but the inventorying of those spaces and the trade, the trade for the valuation. So that would be a significant consideration.
Councilmember Curtis.
Thank you. But I'm intrigued enough that I'm wondering if we could do some exploration on what it would entail doing a tree banking program and come back to us with more information on that. I think that all of these mitigation options are worthwhile. And frankly, I like Councilmember Nixon's idea of creating conservancy throughout the city. But my first priority would be on-site tree planting and going from there. But let's don't say no to tree banking until we know exactly what it would entail and how complicated and expensive it would be.
If I could chime in on that, we actually have, there's a service package that council's approved, and it's listed in the 6-year urban forestry work program to do that more detailed study about tree banking, and do we have the capacity and the land and what would it cost. So we do look forward to bringing that back in the future.
Great. Thanks, Jeremy. Okay, on to question 9.
So related to the last one, should the revenue generated from fees in lieu of planting on development sites be used to fund citywide tree planting programs? So that's actually another one that is maybe constrained, if I could use that word, on what's legally defensible, where we're looking into that right now. If the revenue sources could be used to fund tree planting on public property, or to fund like also tree incentives for planting on private property. So we're looking into this as well.
Council comments? Councilmember Pascal?
Thank you. I'd be interested. I mean, I think from kind of the high level, I don't disagree and certainly support the recommendation. I guess I'd like to understand a little bit more about the citywide tree planting programs, because I guess what I would like to think about and make sure that we're accounting for is that if we're going to be planting trees, I'd like them to be targeted for locations where that mitigation is necessary, or where those trees are going to be able to survive over time and in the best possible manner, or they're addressing some kind of need based upon some assessment. So I don't want to just say planting a tree anywhere in the city is equal, because I don't think that's true. I think there are certain places where it would be much more beneficial to plant. And so I'm not sure, I don't know enough about the citywide tree planting program, but I want to make sure we target it, the mitigation, to where it's going to be most valued.
Right, and that is actually in the our 6-year urban forest work plan is an item right there to look at how equitable those areas are and how to target them
Great.
in a broader sense of just trees, where to plant trees.
Thank you. Further comment, Councilmember Falcone?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, I agree with Councilmember Pascal's comments. And also think that in addition to that, I think that having some sort of citywide tree planting project or program could be something that's really fun and educational for the community as well, to encourage folks to plant more trees on their own private properties. I think this is an idea that I brought forward in one of my first meetings, at least, that I was really excited about to have us look into. I know that King County has done a similar program. And so I'd be interested in looking at what that would look like, both for the more practicality of it, but also just, I think there's also purpose and practicality in getting folks excited around the idea of trees and tree preservations, whether that be with children in schools and families planting trees in their own yards and having service projects in our parks with students and things of that nature. I think it can be a multi-pronged approach to a program like this. So I'm definitely interested in exploring this. Thank you.
Thank you. Further comments? Okay. Question number 10.
So, oops. Oh, it's actually, we're on 11, right? We looked at,
No, we're on 10.
no, we're on 10. Okay. So the question is, should on-site planting standards be tree credits as they currently are, a percentage of trees, species or types of trees, or planting objectives that are environmental in nature, like heat island, stormwater, habitat? And staff recommendations are, basically there's pros and cons for all the different planting standard systems. And we describe in the memo how credits came to be and how they work to, albeit indirectly, equate to canopy cover. And we talked about other cities that have adopted a tree credit system. And all the other planting standards and objectives that we've that have been discussed as well. And we recommend to continue with the current credit system for planting requirements, possibly considering increasing the tree credit requirement. And we think that using code incentives and tree planting programs are probably a more effective way of planting native trees or conifers rather than tree code requirements applied to development. And here's where Councilmember Pascal, the conversation about native trees and species diversity, this conversation comes in because staff is pretty cautious with increasing code complexity, where we even looked at canopy cover on a lot by lot basis or neighborhood by neighborhood basis. Those would be major code changes. So that, and then we left it at, if council agrees, the tree density credits per acre could be increased incrementally by lot size. Where we were saying, like for the, what Jeremy described in the case of an average size lot, say 7,200 square foot lot, the credit requirement would remain the same as 30 because as he described, it can be pretty crowded trying to get more than 5 or 6 trees. But the credit requirement could go up by property size. So does council have a preference for tree planting options with development?
Councilmember Curtis.
I promise I won't talk the whole second half of the meeting. I'm supportive of continuing to use tree credits. I think that it's going to be as to Councilmember Nixon's concern about making it clear for developers when they look at a piece of property. I think that's the answer to our problem. I support increasing the number of credits. I especially appreciate the idea of the larger lot size, increasing the credits. With respect to concern about regulating the number of conifers on a property, just looking at the impact of last week's heat wave, my conifers have come through it much, you're going to use poor grammar here, they've come through it better than my deciduous trees. So I think that as climate changes, as we move into the next decade, we have in our SMP that we're going to create a climate tolerant list of plants. I think that with tree credits, we need to take a hard look at is that 30% conifers, 70% deciduous, so forth. So, and another point I want to make about conifers, it's not just the viability and the size is important. Conifers are incredible, wildlife habitat. They support more habitat for small animals and birds than deciduous trees do. So I'm supportive of using conifers. The other point, nope, that was it. So tree credits, expand tree credits. I think that I know what it was. I like the idea of planting objectives, heat island, stormwater habitat, but I think that's really hard to quantify. Again, to Councilmember Nixon, who isn't going to appreciate this, I thought about calling them tree carbon credits so that we are illustrating a fine point of that trees are important to mitigate climate change. So I'm just throwing that out there as an option. Thank you.
Thank you. Further comments? Councilmember Nixon.
Well, I just wanted to say I definitely agree with the idea of using bonus credits to incentivize getting the types of trees, those kind of things that we want, right?
I like that. Great. Okay, Councilmember Curtis.
I apologize. I left something out. One of the things, all of you hear me talk about green infrastructure and trees on top of buildings and so forth. When we look at tree credits, another thing that we could incent with development, especially multifamily large development, is to give them extra credit for providing trees in, beyond just on land, on roofs, on balconies and so forth. So that's something I want to look at.
Further discussion? Okay, on to 11.
This is, should we reduce tree mitigation requirements for residential development projects that meet a minimum standard of affordable housing? And examples of that. And then staff recommendations is that we suggest alternative means of making it easier to develop affordable housing, that reducing the number of trees, including mature trees within lower income housing area projects could disadvantage residents. And we touched on this a little bit about equity with increased canopy cover, or where to target areas that we could stand to increase canopy cover. And that we have Councilmember Curtis pointed out, a sustainability master plan objective, and it's also in the Urban Forest 6-year work plan as well, to identify these areas with low canopy cover associated with social disparities. And in the meantime, that's tree retention. That's why tree retention is just as important with the development of affordable housing.
Councilmember Nixon.
Well, I think the issue has been brought up already as to whether it will actually make a difference. And I don't know that we've reached out to developers of affordable housing. And I'm not talking about 80% AMI. I'm talking about 30% AMI, right? And will it make a difference on how many units they can build? Transit-oriented development or something like that. I'm skeptical as to whether it would make a difference. The only way I can see that it would make a difference is if we also allowed them to expand the footprints of the buildings. And then that becomes an issue with the neighbors, right? How close to me is that 5-story building going to be? So I think it's complicated, but I would want to really understand whether the people who develop such projects would think that that would allow them to build more units.
Thank you. Further discussion. I just want to make one comment on this one. I think that whatever we end up with has to be a supportive process for affordable housing. So whether it's as Councilmember Nixon describes, somebody who's building at 30 to 50 to 80%, I don't want a tree code that gets in the way. And I think, at some point in time, and we've talked about this before, I believe we should actually look at codes that are very specific, not within the tree code necessarily, but housing affordability codes. So anyway, anybody else? Okay, if you've got a final question.
We do, but I'll just ask if, having read through the staff memo, if staff responded to those questions adequately. The questions that were, what best professional judgment questions does council have for staff that would help with tree code policy decisions?
Council?
There were, over a dozen, 15. There were about 15 questions. Well, there were essentially a lot of these same questions, and then a few more.
So I could suggest if an individual council member wants a follow-up, just send us an email.
Right.
Does that work for folks? Okay, Deb, have you got anything else for us?
And we got through
Sorry,
them.
Deb, if I could I interject really quickly? We talked earlier about coming back to some of the earlier questions. I don't know if you want to do it given the lateness of hour. There was discussion about coming back to 1, 2, and 3 on the fly, but that might be hard to do in the remaining few minutes.
Council, how do you feel? You want that 15 minutes? Okay, then I'm going to say we're done for now, and we will return to our regular meeting in 15 minutes.
Thank you.
Recording in progress.
We're live, Mayor.
Thank you. Okay, we are back in session following a study session tonight on the Kirkland Zoning Code Chapter 95 amendments related to tree management. And we are now at item 4 in our agenda, which takes us to honors and proclamations. And we will start off with Councilmember Curtis after City Manager and Ambassador doing our Parks and Recreation Month proclamation. City Manager.
Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor. So we'll be declaring July as Parks and Recreation Month in the city of Kirkland. And since 1985, the National Recreation and Park Association has designated the month of July as Park and Recreation Month to promote building strong, vibrant, and resilient communities through the power of park and recreation resources. And here to receive the proclamation is our Park Board Chair, Amanda Judd, and Vice Chair Mike Holland.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As a former Park Board member, I'm delighted to read this proclamation. A proclamation of the City of Kirkland designating July as Park and Recreation Month. Whereas park and recreation programs are an integral part of communities throughout this country, including the City of Kirkland. And whereas park and recreation programs are vital to establishing and maintaining the quality of life in our communities, ensuring the health of all residents and contributing to the economic and environmental well-being of the community and region. And whereas park and recreation programs build healthy, active communities, aid in the prevention of chronic disease, provides therapeutic recreation services for those who are mentally or physically disabled, and also improve the mental and emotional health of all residents. And whereas park and recreation programs increase a community's economic prosperity through increased property values, expansion of the local tax base, increased tourism, the attraction and retention of businesses, and crime reduction. And whereas our park and recreation areas ensure the ecological beauty of our community and provide a place for children and adults to connect with nature and recreate outdoors. And whereas Kirkland Parks and Community Services provides over 2,000 recreation programs, serving 20,000 youth, adults, and seniors annually across 52 parks, 58 athletic fields, 3 swimming beaches, 2 community centers, and the community pool. Whereas park and recreation areas and programs are integral components of quality of life, and this July, the City of Kirkland joins the nation in the celebration of the benefits derived from park and recreation resources. Now, therefore, I, Penny Sweet, Mayor of Kirkland, on the behalf of the City Council, do hereby proclaim July as Parks and Recreation Month in the City of Kirkland. Signed this day, 6th day of July, 2021.
Super. Amanda, Mike, is there anything that you would like to say in response?
Hi, yes, thank you. On behalf of Vice Chair Holland and the rest of the Park Board, I just want to express an emphatic thank you to City Council for the recognition and designation of July as Park and Recreation Month. You know, every time I'm engaging in the community, and I mentioned that I serve on the Park Board, every time faces light up and people just express how much they love our parks and our open spaces and our recreation programs. And a lot of that, most of it, if not, is because leaders, city council members have made it a priority to make sure that those are available, to make sure that it is accessible to all of the residents in our community. I also would love to encourage anyone who is listening into this meeting tonight to get involved. We have a wonderful opportunity to participate in our PROS plan, our Parks, Recreation, and Open Spaces plan, which will guide our priorities for the next 6 years. I want to go ahead and turn the time over to Mary Gardocki, who will explain a little bit more on how to get involved with that. Thank you again, City Council members.
Thanks, Amanda. Mary, before you begin, would you mind introducing the rest of the park staff that are here, including your fabulous director.
Absolutely. Lynn Zwagstra is our Parks and Community Services Director. And we also have, I believe, oh, they jumped off. Sarah, there she is, Sarah Schellenberger. She's our Recreation Manager. And I thought we had John Lloyd.
We do.
Oh, okay. Yep. And John Lloyd, he's our Deputy Director. Lastly, I don't know if Mike Holland had any comments that he wanted to share regarding the proclamation before I give a brief update on the pros plan.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. But no, I think Amanda did a great job summarizing how impressed the park board is with the support, the citizens of Kirkland, how much they support parks and recreation, community recreation, and so I think we're okay, and I'll turn it back over to Mary.
Thanks, Mike. Well, this is a great opportunity, and I wanted to take this proclamation, the night of this proclamation for Parks and Recreation Month, because we are at a really important time for the city of Kirkland. We are updating our Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Plan. This is our strategic document that guides our decision-making for the next 6 years. So we're in the process of updating, and part of that process is collecting feedback and doing outreach to make sure that we're hearing the voices. We have conducted some stakeholder interviews as well as some focus groups today. We also conducted our first public forum back in the end of June, middle of June sometime, and we had a really good response to that. We're continuing that outreach over the summer months. In particular, for July, we're trying to reach more of the youth and those that necessarily can't show up to a focus group or take a survey. So we're looking at taking using our Energized by Our campaign, which you'll see in the logo behind me. It's Play It Forward, Imagine the Future of Kirkland's Parks, Recreation, and Open Spaces. So starting in July, actually starting this Friday, you will see a butterfly in the park, and we are encouraging you to catch her. She will be out interviewing folks in the community, trying to specifically work with the young ones and get their feedback on our parks. So come Friday, catch the butterfly. Oh, you can't see my antenna, but they're there. So yeah, looking forward to it, and thank you.
Thanks, and thanks for you all for being here tonight. And I think I also saw Kevin Ball from Parks. Anyway, thank you very much. Okay, that takes us to item number 5, communications. This is the time in our meeting when we normally hear from the public on matters which are not quasi-judicial or scheduled for a public hearing, of which there are none scheduled this evening. Because of current social distancing requirements related to COVID-19 that are still in effect at the city of Kirkland, members of the public cannot participate in person at tonight's meeting. However, the public may still comment by Zoom or by telephone. For those members of the public who are joining us by phone or on Zoom, please limit your remarks to 3 minutes, and the council will receive up to 3 comments on both sides of each issue. If you're participating by Zoom, please click in the participants box to raise your hand to be recognized. For those participating by phone, please dial *9 to be recognized to speak. In addition, if you are participating by Zoom but do not wish to speak, you're encouraged to watch this council meeting by live stream through the city's website. Thank you. City Manager, have we got any interested participants?
So at the moment, we're not seeing anyone raising their hand. Is there anyone who's attending who wishes to speak? Okay.
Okay. Is there anyone on the phone who wishes to speak? Okay, I see none. Therefore, I will declare this items from the audience period complete, which takes us to resolution R5434 update. City Manager.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Actually, first we're going to do the COVID-19 update, and then I'll do the 5434 update.
Good.
So the primary update for the COVID-19 update is that since the last council meeting on June 15th, the governor did actually extend a statewide eviction moratorium. The city council had passed a Kirkland specific moratorium on evictions. And so also in the ordinance that was passed by the city council, there was a report requested, a comprehensive report on all of our rental assistance programs and evictions for the July 20th council meeting. So just wanted to let the council know that in that report, we'll also have a description of the difference between the governor's statewide eviction moratorium and the city of Kirkland's, as well as options. The council obviously could choose to just leave the current moratorium in the city in place, could decide whether or not you wanted to repeal the moratorium and leave the statewide moratorium in place or make modifications to the city of Kirkland moratorium. In addition, that report will also talk about our efforts to connect people, both landlords and tenants, to financing. So I think as the council knows, we had a citywide mailing that went out that hit last week and over the weekend to every household in Kirkland, asking landlords and tenants, anyone who needed financial assistance, to contact us. We have had some contacts, not enough to be able to give you information yet. Each one is a conversation with a person, a tenant, a family, and so we're working through that. We hope to have a lot more to talk with the council about on the 20th. So we will keep you posted, but we are starting to get some activity from the mailing, which was also done in multiple languages. So there'll be additional activities that go out this next 2 weeks as well to both landlords and tenants following up on the mailing, and a lot more to come to the council on the 20th. So final thing, just a reminder that we're going to be opening City Hall to the public on August 2nd, as well as the Kirkland Justice Center lobbies, and that the community centers will be fully open on August 2nd. They're already open for certain park and recreation activities already, and the pool is also open while complying with state guidelines. So unless the council has any questions, that is my COVID-19 update.
I do have one. With regard to our August 3rd meeting, or 4th, is it 4th? Yes. How are we going to make sure the public understands that we will be virtual for one more time?
Yeah, so we'll be making that clear in our communications leading up and in our normal This Week in Kirkland notices about the council meeting, and also be on the website that the meeting will be virtual, not in person. And
great.
Some of us will be here, so if anyone does show up, we can certainly talk to them if they do arrive.
Great. Councilmember Black, did you have a question? Okay.
And then on the 5434 update, I just want to let you know that the Right to Breathe Committee has reached back out to myself, the Chief of Police, and Deputy City Manager. They would like a chance to meet again in the near future, which we will do. They are considering updating their scorecard for the cities on the east side. So at this point, that's all we know, but we're looking forward to getting a chance to talk with them again. It's been a little bit of a break, and so we're looking forward to reconnecting. And that is my 5434 update until next council meeting, unless council members have questions.
Okay, thank you. That takes us to item number 8, the consent calendar. Before I ask for a motion, I'd like to ask Councilmember Nixon to present the audit of accounts.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Since our last meeting, we had bills in the amount of $6,761,999.87 and payroll in the amount of $4,421,812.75. These are a bit higher than usual because it's been 3 weeks since our last meeting instead of 2.
Thank you. Can I get a motion to approve the consent calendar?
So moved.
I'm going to give that to, I think that was Councilmember Black, and I'm going to give the second to Councilmember Falcone. Any discussion? It's been moved by Councilmember Black, seconded by Councilmember Falcone to accept the consent calendar. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Mayor, we have legislation that requires a roll call vote.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see that. Then clerk, will you please call the roll?
Thank you. Councilmember Nixon?
Yes.
Councilmember Black?
Yes.
Councilmember Curtis?
Yes.
Councilmember Falcone?
Yes.
Councilmember Pascal,
Yes.
Mayor Sweet.
Yes, motion carries unanimously. And ordinance 4762 is approved. All right. So that takes us to,
A point of order, Madam Mayor.
please, I'm lost a little.
Yeah, 4762 is our next agenda item, 9A.
Thank you. Okay, we're in our business agenda, business portion of our agenda. So the first item is the Kirkland Municipal Code update with regard to marina moorage infractions. City Manager.
Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor. So the ordinance today, we're looking to change the amount of the fee if people don't, the amount of the fine if people don't pay for moorage at our marina site. And here to make the presentation is our Parks and Community Services Deputy Director, John Lloyd, and our Program Coordinator, Kevin Ball, who coordinates the harbor.
All right. Linda, do you want to say anything before we kick it off? Okay. Well, thank you, Madam Mayor and City Council. I'm going to turn over most of the time to Kevin, but I do want to just kind of give a little background on the issue. As you know, we've had the marina is a very, very popular part of the community, especially during the hot summer months. We've faced some challenges with difficult folks down there, and one of our major issues is for people that don't pay their moorage. That's why we're coming to you this evening. I'll let Kevin give the background on that. We are really trying to keep this focused on this one item. We're aware there's many other issues down at the marina, and we do plan on coming back with a more wholesale update of the code, but felt like it would be more prudent to try and get ahead of the moorage issues this summer by just addressing this one issue right now, and then coming back later this summer for or later this year for a broader discussion about the code. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kevin, who knows all things moorage.
Welcome, Kevin.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Council. I plan to keep this short and concise and try not to be redundant as you have the memo before you. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to give you a little detail about marina operations, a little background on the issue, and explain what it is that we're asking of the council. So first of all, let's talk about, and let me get the slideshow up here going. Can you see the background at all?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I think you just have to shift it to slideshow mode.
All right, there we go. So a little bit about marina operations. I'll talk about the moorage requirements, enforcement protocol, harbor master responsibilities, and park ranger responsibilities. The moorage process at the marina is very much like that of parking your car in a parking lot. We have simplified it as much as we can. We've made it as normative as much as we can. Basically, you moor your boat in a slip as you would park a car in a stall. You acquire a receipt from the pay station. You would place the receipt on the boat where it can be seen. It must be visible. And then you return at expiration of time. We do make one additional requirement where we ask people to put their WIN number or their boat name. That is simply a result of people stealing receipts out of open boats and putting them in other boats. So this way we can, at least when we're checking, know if the WIN number matches the boat in which the receipt is on. But that is the basic moorage process. It's just very simply the same way in which you would park your car in a public parking lot or paid parking lot. Enforcement protocol. Currently, we are providing coverage each day from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. The harbor masters cover the 1 to 9 p.m. shifts, and the park ranger and I cover the 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. shifts. This schedule is in force each year from Memorial Day weekend to Labor Day weekend. And in the off season, the park ranger and I cover enforcement during work hours. So we're able to provide 7-day coverage from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. The harbor master responsibilities, to explain them, we work off a program called SEA, and that represents safety, education, and enforcement. The harbor master's 3 tasks are to make sure that the dock is safe, the boat launch is safe, boats are safe, there's no spillage in the water, we don't have boats that are untied, that commercial areas are free of boats so that the waterways and previously Argosy can get in and out. So they're to keep an eye on that dock and be the eyes for the city as to how it's in repair and how safe it is. The second is education. They're also there to inform park goers and boaters of what the park regulations are, what the codes are, as well as what the amenities are, what restaurants would they like to eat at, where they would like to get a drink, where they can, boaters often ask, where's a little grocery store even that they can go. And we make the harbor masters aware of all these things so that they can help inform the boaters and park goers of what the city offers through its parks. Lastly is the enforcement element. And what we do with that is we enforce the KMC 1436070. So basically what we're working on is moorage non-payment, boat launch violations, 5-day violations, and I'll list this out in another slide for you. But just basically what's in the KMC 1436070 is what we enforce. So that's a little detail about the marina operations. Do you have any questions about that? Okay. So a little history here. It's become apparent to us that the $66 penalty for violation is becoming less effective as a deterrent to those who choose not to pay moorage. And many are now choosing to forego payment until they receive their first citation. In 2021, we have to date issued 69 citations just for non-payment of moorage. And that is 3 times the amount that were issued in 2023 during the same time period. And that is quite a hike. Now, whereas one may argue or may think that it's just directly related to pandemic, I think there's several reasons that point otherwise. One, we had a good deal of boaters in dock during this time last year as people were able to escape the confines of their homes by being on their boats in a park. And also the pandemic was still in place with us in 2021. And still we saw this increase. Secondly, boaters have informed us that there are those who are now giving instruction to other boaters as to how to beat the system and pay less moorage. For example, if a 40-foot boat pulls in the day before, gets a free hour pass, skips paying moorage, stays the night on the power side, and receives a citation the next day, they only have to pay $66 of the $100 that they actually owe. The day they came in is $40. The next day is $40, the day they got the citation, and there's 2 days of power usage at $10 a day. And so they're utilizing this, and they're actually sharing with each other how to bring their moorage costs down by just receiving a citation. And which leads me to the third point. Boaters have also informed us that as this is a civil infraction that does not go on their record, they really see no reason to pay for moorage upon each of their return until they receive their first citation. And there have been a remarkable amount of boaters who have expressed that to me. So the ask currently, the 1436070 compliance that we have, is just stating that there is a $66 infraction fine per incident or per citation. And what we would like to see and what we're suggesting is that we raise that base infraction to $150. Now, what that would do is would bring us in line with every other infraction within the 1436-070, which is $150. The only fine that is $66 less than the $150 is the mortgage with non-payment. By moving that up, we would keep things in alignment with the rest of the KMC. And we would also suggest that we increase the fine or put it on an escalating scale, that on the first fine, they will receive $150. On the second citation, within 30 days, they would receive $200 fine. And upon that third citation, the fine would go to $250. What we believe and what we hope these amendments to the code would serve is it would be a significant deterrent enough to ensure that the boaters who are willing to pay mortgage have fair and equitable access to the marina docks and the park amenities. When people aren't paying, they are occupying a space that somebody who is willing to pay and wants to enjoy our parks simply cannot. And we do have a finite amount of spaces in the main marina and the Second Avenue dock, especially during summertime when we have very heavy usage and boats circling almost like sharks for slips in the marina. So that is my brief presentation to you, and I thank you again for your time, and I would like to answer any questions that you may have.
Council questions? Kelly, did I see your hand? Councilmember Curtis.
I promised I wouldn't talk. Kevin, thank you for that. And honestly, it's really disappointing to hear this. Does this mean that so the third infraction, the fine is $250, but there could possibly be a fourth and fifth infraction, and so that would just continue $250 each day that they're not paying?
Well, upon the fourth or fifth infraction, then we would do what would be called an impound in place.
Okay.
We'd simply chain their boat to the dock, and then they would have to go to PD, for instance, and pay all their fines.
Okay.
Let us know, and we'd release it. Otherwise, it's just throwing money, and they just end up in collections.
Right. Okay. And that was going to be my next question, is what is our recourse? Because then my question is, if we have these repeat offenders, can we just not welcome them back to the dock? Let's say that they've incurred these large fines, we've impounded them, they've left, they come back 3 weeks later. Is there a point where we're saying you're not welcome in Kirkland because you're not playing fair with the other voters? The second question is, it was on eviction, but I guess that basically is, if we impound them and they pay the fine, do they leave or do they get to stay and just start reoccurring this again?
Okay, so to answer your first question, what we used to do is we would trespass boats after that fourth or fifth violation, and they could not return to the park for a year.
Okay.
Currently, we are not trespassing people for civil infractions. So that tool we're unable to use at this time. The second question is, and if you could repeat that for me, was regarding vacating after the impoundment?
Yeah, it was, could we evict them if they weren't paying their fines? But so after we impound them and they pay their fines, do they get to stay and possibly incur fines, or do we say, thank you for paying your fines, you need to go now?
At that time, we would vacate the boat out of the marina.
Okay.
Now,
okay.
The difficulty is that we don't really have an established time in which we can vacate them. I can't say to them, you are vacated for 5 days. So
okay.
we could vacate them, and then the next day or two, we could see them show up again.
Okay. So I support these fine increases, but it sounds like we need to have another conversation, include the Tourism Development Committee on giving away free mortgage and what we want to do about evictions and telling people they're not welcome for a year and so forth. But I do support these fine increases. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Black.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I support these fine escalation process. I do have a somewhat technical question, Kevin. I don't know if the city manager is able to share with you my question. It was something he and I discussed earlier today. Can you go to the previous slide, Kevin? I think it might be helpful context. Okay. So under the $150 fine, we're showing of mooring in restricted areas, a violation of subsection 2. We're showing rafting, a violation of subsection 3. And of course, we're showing failure to pay moorage, a violation of subsection 1. Now, in the ordinance that we're looking at today, there are amendments only to subsection 1. So the escalation process appears in amended subsection 1. So it's very clear, I think, it's very clear that the escalation process applies to moorage without payment. My question ultimately will be, are we approving today an escalation process also applicable to a violation of subsection 2 and 3, mooring in restricted areas and rafting? And I don't want to get into it now, maybe if I can talk a little bit more detail, but suffice it to say, when I read the ordinance amendments as written, I think there's a little bit of ambiguity, at least to me, on whether even as written, the amendments to subsection 1 might apply that escalation process to violations of 2 and 3. Can we talk about that real quick?
The intention, especially for clarity and just keeping things very succinct and clean, was all we were asking for was the escalation for the moorage without payment, not the others. And that's why I tried to keep it in the B1 section, as opposed to extending it down all the way to C, which is otherwise specified. All other violations are considered a civil infraction, and they are also $150. So the escalation that we're asking for an amendment on now is just purely for the moorage without payment. So just to keep that clean.
Okay. I mean, I guess I'd be interested what my colleagues think about it as a policy matter. The mooring in restricted areas and the rafting, you could argue it's the same incentives and the same, for lack of a better term, creative workaround is going to lead to some of those violations as well. So I do think you could ask as a policy matter whether, the same escalation process should apply to those equally. And then I would say, and this might be a question better for our city attorney, Kevin. This is a little bit, admittedly, we're a little in the weeds here, but on line 43, line 45, and line 47 of the amended code, which appears in the ordinance, we do refer to basically previous violations of this chapter. And I don't actually know off the top of my head, Kevin, our city attorney, Mr. City Attorney, does that apply when we use the term this chapter? Do we mean all of chapter 14 of the Kirkland Municipal Code?
I believe
no, let me
correct. I think Kevin can best answer that.
Okay, yeah, the other Kevin. Hey, so.
Oh, sorry, I was confusing my Kevins. My fault.
No, that's all right. We both sit up straight when we hear our name. So the answer to your question, Councilmember Black, is that in drafting this mandatory language, I misinterpreted what Parks wanted to do. If the intent is to limit the escalation of the penalties to non-payment of the moorage fees, then you would not want to say provisions of this chapter. You would want to say provisions of this subsection 1. And so that if that's what the council wishes to do, that would be appropriate for an amendment. But as drafted, and certainly my intent in suggesting this language was that it would apply to any of the moorage provisions of this chapter, and not to the entire title.
Okay, that's very helpful, Kevin. I appreciate that. And subsection, for my colleagues, I guess, subsection 2 and 3 both apply to mortgage, at least in my opinion. So I guess it's a policy question for the group, for the council, how we feel about this. I guess personally, I would just say that I'd be okay applying the escalation to all 3 categories of mortgage violations, on the grounds that they're all they all have the same root cause, which is trying to get around our mortgage restrictions, and they're unfair to the people who are willing and able. And also, I think, for our downtown businesses, we want people following the mortgage rules, and we want to have the mortgage rules in some ways create that turnover so that we have more people coming down and visiting our downtown, and there's more access and more fairness. And so anyway, that would be my preliminary vote, and I'd love to hear from my colleagues.
Councilmember Pascal.
Interesting discussion. Thank you, Councilmember Black. A question for the staff, for Kevin Ball. These other fines that occur, do they occur very often, or are they pretty infrequent?
No, rafting, not so much, but the other ones, yes, they do occur often, and they also do occur often with repeat offenders. I see great benefit in applying it across as a deterrent for people to not violate these codes.
Yeah, I think that's a great read there, Councilmember Black. I certainly support that. The other question I'd have for you, Kevin, is you say for these escalating fines, you say within the preceding 30 days. Is there a reason why you chose 30 days as opposed to just a boating season, for example?
I believe that was just in the language. I am not opposed to the boating season. It makes more sense to me to apply it to the entire season, because otherwise, with boaters who camp all summer long, they just repeat the cycle each month.
Right.
Yeah. And so I would like to see it applied to the entire boating season.
So if we're going to make some changes, that would be the other thing I would suggest modifying, is to apply it to the entire season, which is, from my understanding, is from Memorial Day to Labor Day. Is that correct?
April 1 to the end of October. Yeah.
Okay, sorry, yeah, April 1 to end of October. Thank you.
Councilmember Nixon.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I concur with what Councilmember Black and Councilmember Pascal have been suggesting. I think that moving this escalation and all mention of what the penalty is into subsection C would be fairly straightforward. So instead of saying in each of the numbered subsections that it's 150, it's 150, et cetera, just there's already kind of a catch-all in subsection C that says it's 150 for any violation. Well, let's just stick that in there and have the escalation language there so it applies to any combination of the various penalties. So people who are not paying don't switch over to rafting or switch over into restricted areas. And I agree in particular with Councilmember Pascal's suggestion of having it be a longer period of time. It may be easier to simply say a calendar year rather than a specific season. That would be, I think that would be easier for people to understand and interpret without having to define specific dates. So one thing I wanted to ask is, if we wanted to make these changes, if we didn't do them tonight, but say instructed staff to go off and bring us back another proposal, that would delay the implementation by another couple of weeks. And so my question for the city attorney is if we finish this discussion about what we'd like to see, is there a possibility that you could draft a substitute that implemented the things we're talking about, that we could table this now and bring it back off the table later in the meeting to consider a substitute?
Yeah, I think so, Councilmember Nixon. I mean, I could certainly, you don't have a lot of additional business to do tonight, so it would be a little bit of a scramble, but I know where you're looking, subsection C, and I could certainly add the escalating penalties to subsection C. There's still the question outstanding of whether it's 30 days or voting season or calendar year. But if I get right on it, I could probably get you a red line substitute to look at for the end of the meeting.
So do we want to listen to additional comment and then make that decision to table?
Yeah.
Okay, I think I've got Councilmember Curtis next. No, Councilmember Lack.
I was just going to say I love this idea. I'm happy to be a part of it, especially the tabling it and getting it done. And I really appreciate Kevin jumping on that. That would be great. And I like Councilmember Nixon's idea of just making it a calendar year. I think it's clean and simple. So that would be that'd be my direction to our city attorney.
Can I get head nods on that? That's what it looks like. Kevin, you got what you need?
Yeah. Let me work on a red line, and then I'll send it to council staff, city manager, and city clerk just as soon as I can get it ready.
Great. Can I get a motion to table?
Yeah, I move that we table this till the end of the agenda.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to table this agenda item till the end of the agenda. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Carries unanimously. Thank you. Good work. All right, that takes us to item B, authorization for the city manager to enter negotiations for property acquisition of the Village Plaza of Kirkland. City manager.
Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor. So this is just a presentation from me. I don't have a formal slideshow, but as this will be the first step in the process, but looking for direction tonight to authorize me to enter into negotiations to purchase the Village Plaza, which is at 11825 100th Avenue Northeast in Kirkland. And Councilman Nixon pointed out we had a juxtaposition of the numbers, which I think is clarified in the substitute for the right address. Just very briefly, the reason that proposing that we enter into these negotiations is this sixplex has a lot of really interesting and desirable parts to it with the council's priority of affordable housing across all levels of income. So first, it's 5 2-bedroom, 1-bath units and 1 1-bedroom, 1-bath. And 2-bedroom units are pretty rare in the affordable housing world. Most of what gets built right now is studios and 1-bedroom apartments. The second thing is it's very well located, right by the 255 transit line and by Juanita Village and by Juanita Beach Park and Juanita Bay Park. So it's very close to all the amenities one would want. And then what we don't yet know is exactly what we might do with it. So want to be very clear about that. The goal here would be to use it in some way to either for affordable housing, for emergency housing for those experiencing homelessness, or even as possible transitional housing for employees that we're bringing from out of state or out of the region to give them a chance to be here for a bit until they find a more permanent home. So those are the various options we're looking at. The way we are proposing to finance it in the short term would be as a short-term interfund loan, and then to come back with a final financing proposal to the council, depending on the use that we decided ultimately for it. And that could include things like using our own budget real estate excise tax. It could include looking for funding from the Arch Trust Fund. It could look at some other options, and or including the rents that could get paid could also help finance part of the purchase. So the other thing I want to emphasize tonight is that this is an older unit. It was built in 1967. So what we're asking for is to enter into negotiations for a purchase and sale agreement. That purchase and sale agreement would come back to you with a much more formal presentation for council action. And included in that purchase and sale agreement, we would have sufficient contingencies both for financing and for condition to make sure that there's nothing in the project we're not seeing that might be really expensive or might make us not want to purchase the property. So with that as a very quick overview, I'm happy to answer any questions or address any concerns.
Council, questions, clarifications? Councilmember Nixon.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, a couple of questions. We talk about this as being kind of easy to access the bus line and those kind of things, but that's as the crow flies. And I'm wondering if you've looked into whether there actually is a walking path if you go down the hill from the building. I noticed there is a gate down there, but I was not so ambitious as to go figure out where that gate led to. Do you know where that gate goes to? And is it a shortcut over to Juanita Village?
So I actually saw the gate as well. I did not try it either. I believe it is a cut through, and I'll see if, I know Chris Dodd was tracking this as well, but we can confirm that. But I do believe there's a way to get from there to there. But I'll confirm that.
Thank you. And my other question had to do with the current residents. Do you know how many of the units are occupied and what would be our transition plan? I mean, I don't think we want to bump the people who are living there now, but have you thought about how you would transition it to the uses you have in mind?
That's an excellent question. So we don't yet. That would be part of the due diligence as we look at this is what is the current occupancy, what are the leases, and whether they're, at what period of time are they in the leases? And then depending on the use, we would determine whether those residents will be phased out over time or they may very well qualify for some of the programs we want to put in place. So we would probably work with some of our partners like the Housing Authority, the King County Housing Authority, and others who've done similar things. So they have some good operations for how you deal with residents who are currently there to make sure that no one is displaced.
Great.
But yeah, that would be part of what we'd come back to you with is those kinds of answers, were we to actually propose to purchase it. So this isn't a decision to buy, it's a decision to let us formally begin the negotiation process.
Thank you.
Super. Further questions or discussion? Okay, can I get a motion to approve Resolution R5484, authorizing the city manager to undertake negotiations related to the potential acquisition of real property for affordable housing purposes?
So moved.
The move by Councilmember Falcone. Seconded by Councilmember Curtis. Any further discussion? Question is on the motion to approve Resolution R5484. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Okay, this takes us back to our tabled item. Is that possible?
You could still go to the other items on the agenda if you prefer.
Yeah, my intent was for it to be at the very end.
Okay, that's good. All right, then that takes us to reports, and I'm going to see them as I read them. That starts us with Councilmember Black.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Boy, reports came up so quickly. It kind of shocked me here. Okay, so really not a ton of report, although I did want to do a little bit of cheerleading at the end of my report, and I'll explain that in a second. I did attend the chronic homelessness discussion that was put on by Challenge Seattle and our former governor, Christine Gregoire. And I think the mayor circulated the presentation materials to the group, so everyone has that. And you should definitely, if you find the time, you should definitely take some time to look at that. And some of the information and data on chronic homelessness in our region. Like all the rest of our council members, I attended the 132nd Square Park groundbreaking. It's really neat to see that project get off the ground. And I apologize to everyone, including staff, for being a little bit late to that. But it was wonderful to see everybody. And then last, a little bit of cheerleading. I know I'm not alone in this. I think a couple of our other fellow council members have attended ribbon cuttings recently. I attended a ribbon cutting for one of our newest chiropractic businesses, but it's just great to be out there in the business community and with our residents and neighbors and employees of our businesses and whatnot, and our Chamber of Commerce staff. person to person visiting, sharing appetizers and beverages in the warm sun and cutting ribbons. And so anyway, that's exciting. And, you know, in case anyone was doubting it, Kirkland downtown businesses are open. And so that's it. That's all I had to report.
Super. Councilmember Curtis.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, first I want to say thank you and how grateful I am for the city's response to the recent heat emergency. We work really well together in a crisis, and I was really impressed with the way that staff stepped up and pulled things together over a really nice weekend they could have spent at home with their families. I visited the cooling shelter at Peter Kirk. It was packed. People were grateful to be there. Lots of dogs. Well done, City of Kirkland. So thank you to staff. I also want to thank park staff for quickly distributing loaner life jackets to all the swim beaches that Friday night for the heat wave. I think we probably saved some lives in doing that. And Councilor Falcone had the brilliant idea of also adding them to OO Denny. So I applaud that move. Thank you, Councilor Falcone. And you know, the residents continue to come together. We had one resident that brought a group of volunteers together who collected 5,000 water bottles that they distributed to shelters, to the safe parking program, and so forth. And I just continue to be impressed with how this community rallies when people are in need. I attended the Building for Belonging Summit. The next one is on the 23rd. Anything that Debbie Lacey puts together is so well done. So I encourage you to attend that. Attended the Juneteenth celebration in Redmond, which was also well attended, well done. Attended the Pride event at Kirkland Urban in supporting Eastside Pride Pacific Northwest, and it was fabulous. And as Councilmember Black said, it was so wonderful to be with people, you know, smiling and dancing and so forth. And I visited Totem Lake Park the day that we opened it last Friday night, and it was packed. And the kids were really happy to be there, and the adults were very happy to be there too. Next week I have SBA picks, so I'll send you an agenda on that. It's on my birthday, so I want you all to know that I'm going to pick on my birthday for you. I couldn't possibly ask Councilmember Nixon to do it again. And some of you haven't picked up your mail yet, but there is a very nice letter and a surprise in your mailbox, and I just want to thank Chief Sanford and Chief Harris for what they left us. It means a lot. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Nixon.
Nothing else to report, Madam Mayor.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Falcone.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Wow, it's always nice to go near the end of these because I can check off some of the things I was going to mention, but just want to underscore, you know, all the praise for city staff just doing a fantastic job with the cooling centers. I mean, we did save lives. You did save lives, I'm sure. So thank you so much for being so flexible, setting that up. And I was able to visit those cooling centers as well and see them in action and seeing them utilized. It was really quite amazing to see our staff just really working hard and really caring about meeting the needs of our community members. So thank you so much for that. Thank you also for adding the park staff for adding the loaner life jackets to Denny Park. I know I've heard a lot of folks make good use of those. So again, another great opportunity to save lives in our community. Also have to put in another plug for the what I'd like to call either the Rainbow or the Pride Playground at Totem Lake. It is my kids' new favorite playground. In fact, they are all there right now having fun. My husband's been texting me pictures. So as we're meeting, they're enjoying it. We've enjoyed it several times and we'll continue to. And it's always so busy and so popular and the kids are having so much fun. So just in the theme of everything that's been said so far, this community is coming together to look out for one another, to look out for the business community, like Councilmember Black said, and just to have fun. And it's so exciting to see. Really enjoyed the Kirkland Urban and Eastside Pride Pacific Northwest event. I'm so proud of the city of Kirkland being a partner in that with the Eastside Pride Pacific Northwest. It was so much fun. It was just such a joy to see folks gathering safely and having fun together and enjoying one another's company. Also really, really excited to do personally my first ever ribbon cutting coming up later this week for Nothing Bundt Cakes. And I'm really excited for this business. I've heard so many folks just rave about them and are really excited to have them join the community. So I'm particularly looking forward to that later this week. Also looking forward to the community court graduation next week. Also have a meeting next week with the King County Regional Homelessness Authority to discuss sub-regional planning. So looking forward to that. Get to see one of our favorite previous SCA staff, Alexis, that's joined the King County Regional Homelessness Authority. So get to meet with her next week. She's going to be visiting here in Kirkland for that meeting. And finally, I am really excited that my family is going to be going on a family vacation in a couple of weeks. So in our next meeting, my family will be out of town, enjoying ourselves. So I'd like to ask council to, at a minimum, excuse my presence at the study session at our next meeting. And there are a couple of items on the agenda that are of particular interest to me that I'm still have not decided whether I will plan to attend the regular meeting. I'd like to see the packet and take a look at more specifics of what we'll be talking about. And so if it's okay with council, I've already spoken with the city manager and mayor, and I'll let them know in advance what my plan is, but at the very least, I'd like to be excused from our next study session, and I may or may not attend the regular meeting, but I will determine that ahead of time after I've seen the packet. So I will be at the water park enjoying splashing around with my toddler.
Sounds good. Councilmember Pascal.
Well, I don't have much to add. Just a couple things. One, another thank you to park staff. Leaving up the pop-up dog park at Juanita Beach Park. I think that's the most I've heard from the community in some time about one issue. So it's great to be able to see how to do that. So thank you. I have on my calendar an East Trail event on Friday. Planning to attend with, I think, some of the state delegation. And then just the last thing, I wanted to update the rest of the council. We had a young student reach out to us, it was probably a month ago via email, with a proposal about how to implement more bicycle facilities and maintain those bicycle facilities. And she was a student at the Environmental and Venture School on Finn Hill. And I just want to let you know that I did meet with her, talked with her about that, and then connected her with transportation staff. And I think some of the things that she mentioned, are going to likely see some of that in the next update on the active transportation plan. So
Super, thank you. Okay, and I will try to be brief. A lot of stuff going on, but I'm going to be a third person to just say kudos, Kirkland. I am so proud. The cooling centers, the response to the heat wave was just overwhelming, and some of the conversations that I had with people in the cooling center and their incredible appreciation for the loving care they received was just absolutely made me cry. Okay, a couple other things. Had a board session with the Cascade Water Alliance, and John and I have decided we're going to ask Kurt to get us a study session in order for us all to hear a presentation on a long-term planning process that is being recommended to the board, which has fairly significant implications for the future. I had a meeting met with the AWC Large City Advisory Committee meeting, which was solely taken up with discussion of ARPA and how it is being handled in various cities throughout the state. I think that a whole lot of what we're doing, I talked a whole lot during this meeting, and it was actually the first time I've ever spent as much time talking at one of those meetings. And people were really engaged. And of course, as usual, they want to do what we're doing. Also had a follow-up meeting to the meeting that Councilmember Black mentioned. I met with a small group meeting with Governor Gregoire and mayors from 9 other cities in the state to talk more specifically about the things to do. And since I didn't go to the SCA one, her passion around this is really with regard to what we do in terms of influencing our legislators and the governor. So I want to suggest that we task the legislators subcommittee to have a discussion about what we might do to approach our legislators in advance of next year's session. And if I can get head nods on that, we'll just go ahead with it. Or if anybody has any other questions, 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's go. Okay. Then I too got to cut a ribbon last week, and my ribbon was the Chateau Saint Michel tasting room, my nearest competitor. It was a lot of fun. There were about 50 people there. It was great to, actually I ran into some representatives from Saint Michel who I've known for 40 years because they used to distribute to me at the early grape choice. So it was a really fun event. Then finally we had a meeting. Kurt and I met with Claudia last week. And most of our meeting discussion was around 2 items. The process for the transfer station planning process. She's incredibly supportive of the letters that we have submitted, and I think she's going to rattle the cages just a little bit for that. We wanted very much to sit down and listen to her because we were wondering what the alternative plan, the Bellucci plan, is with regard to suggestions to Sound Transit for the next steps. She's very supportive of the requests that we have submitted and is fighting a battle for us, I would say. And City Manager, you can certainly pile on to that if you want to, and that's all. So now I can turn it over to City Manager.
Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor. So I do have 2 items before I get to my report. The first is we do have a legislative request memo on busking and parks. This was a postponement from the June meeting. And so I believe Lynn Zwagstra is going to be joining us to walk you through the LRM. A very short presentation, and then just a reminder to the council, the direction we're seeking is whether to take any action on the LRM, which will be done via motion, and a decision to seek action is not a decision to final passage. So with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Lynn.
Hello, good evening, Council. So I have just a very quick presentation on busking in parks. Essentially, just to define the problem, we've seen a great deal of conflict between buskers, and they are calling the Kirkland Police Department a great deal, as well as submitting Q alerts and calling Parks and Community Services. It seems to be about 3 or 4 different buskers, but there are community members weighing in on that as well. Essentially, the issue is a discrepancy between the municipal code on amplification versus noises audible greater than 50 feet from the source. So the question on the table, if I understand it correctly from Councilmember Nixon, is essentially item 4 here, is does the council support having staff go forward with a study on busking, specifically looking at the legalities of it and logistics of regulating it? And that might include providing a recommendation of a permitting process, or it might provide other alternatives as well. The other possibilities would be status quo, do nothing, or make a simple change to the municipal code that corrects that discrepancy. Or a third one is simply disallow busking in parks, which would be just a couple word changes in the municipal code. So on that note, I'll turn it over to council for discussion.
Thank you. There you all are. Councilmember Nixon.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, earlier this afternoon, I forwarded an email. I had meant to do this earlier, but Deputy Mayor Arnold and I had a bit of an email discussion about this topic. And he had found a very interesting website, which had a collection of the constitutional law issues around regulation of busking, sample ordinances from a variety of locales, and even some sort of model ordinances. You know, obviously you can't take a model ordinance and just adopt it as is. We would still need to review it. But in going through that website, it was interesting how it helped to clarify, for me at least, what things we were allowed to do and what the issues were. And so if we look at the LRM, I think there are some things that need to be clarified in our code beyond simply the ability to use amplification that's not audible further away than 50 feet. And this bullet list was embedded in that email that I sent. But just to quickly review that list, I think we need to clarify whether or not buskers accepting donations is considered soliciting, which is currently prohibited in parks unless you have a permit. And so we need to clarify whether it falls under that prohibition on soliciting without a permit. We need to clarify whether or not busking requires a business license. And because our definition of businesses is so broad, I think it's very possible that busking could be considered to be a business. We have the noise ordinance provisions, and we need to clarify whether that 50-foot limit has to be obeyed by buskers, not only when they're using amplification, but simply when they're playing louder musical instruments like brass instruments that are audible much further away than 50 feet. We have some of the other cities that have regulated busking have made clarifications about blocking of sidewalks, and that just like we don't allow other sidewalk users to block them, we should consider whether that should be specifically mentioned in our sidewalk code. There have been instances in some of the locales that were mentioned in that website where street performances kind of cross the line into being disorderly conduct or even obscenity. And we might want to clarify the limits constitutionally, but the limits on street performances, what people can and can't do. Stripping on the street corner is probably not one of them. And then the whole question about sharing a venue, coexisting peacefully with other street performers. And so all these clarifications are, each of them individually, I think, is a fairly minor change to the city code once we've addressed the policy questions. And none of them actually require the creation of a massive new busking regulation ordinance like they have at Pike Place Market or like they've done recently in Redmond. It could just be this series of clarifications is sufficient to get us through the current questions. Some of them can be just rule changes done by the Parks Director. Others would have to be amendments to city code. So anyway, my proposal is that we go ahead with the work on the LRM, but that in addition to looking at an all-up new regulation ordinance, that we also look at whether our needs could be met with just a series of more minor clarifications, and ask the staff to also bring that back to us as an option.
Thank you. Further discussion. Councilmember Curtis.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think that we should look into this. I think that the problem is going to continue. I think that when individuals see somebody else busking, they're like, oh, well, I can do that too. So I think this is going to be an ongoing issue, and it's something that we should look into. One of the things that I'm interested in exploring, when the mayor and I met with the merchants on Park Lane, there was a lot of concern about the musicians on Park Lane, that they were blocking the sidewalks, that they were disruptive, that they were pulling power from stores, they were blocking entry to stores, they were competing with each other. So I think that we need to expand Park Lane and other business districts in this evaluation. It's July. I don't think we're going to get this done this summer. So there's not a great urgency to move other work products off the table right now. I think this is something we need to do in preparation probably for next summer. But I don't think we're going to be able to turn it around this summer. So we could look at it, you know, that it's complete when we look at Park Lane again, or when the Kirkland Scramble is done, or so forth. But I do think it's something that we need to start evaluating and doing some due diligence on.
Further discussion. Okay, I'm going to just add that I don't think we can just ignore it for this summer. I feel like, I mean, right now it's a municipal offense, right? We got to make a determination with regard to, if nothing else, the amplification issue. And, you know, what I'd love to see is, I'd love to see all of the issues that Toby pointed out addressed. But I think that given that website, and I only got to spend a few minutes on it this evening, there might be some indicators that we can just grab. But I think we have to do something with regard to the noise violation. And that will help our police department, I think, in regulating it to the degree that it is. But with the amount of park activity that's going on, I don't know that we don't have buskers in more places than than where they're fighting or on Park Lane. But they're there now. They're there almost every night on Park Lane. So I just feel like we have to have some guidance, or we're just going to continue to run into this thing.
So, Madam Mayor, if I can just, when you say, oops, sorry, I turned myself off. There we go. If you could clarify what you mean by the noise issue, because today the amplification is prohibited, right?
Exactly, and we're not prohibiting it.
Well, we actually are. That's what led to the conflict, was the non-amplified folks were calling the police on the amplified folks.
Okay.
So the testimony you heard was that was the person who has the amplification felt that was unfair and wanted to see a change.
Because the person who has the amplification plays an instrument that has to have amplification to be heard.
Correct.
Even up to the noise limitation. I just feel like that those two things are in conflict with one another. And if people don't agree with me, that's fine. Amy, or Councilmember Falcone, did you have something else?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I did. So I agree with Councilmember Curtis. I see this as something that doesn't have as much urgency that I'd like to see us have as part of a comprehensive conversation, perhaps this fall or winter, when we're talking about downtown, Park Lane, and other things. I think it can be part of that conversation. But I also agree with you, Mayor Sweet, that that there may, if there's something that we can do in the interim, in the short time that's temporary, that can help, maybe it won't completely solve the problem, but put a Band-Aid on it, at least for this summer, I'm very open to that as well. And I don't have specific ideas for that, but if staff has ideas or other council members on what that short-term kind of quick fix can be, so we can help at least a little bit while we're waiting for that, because that's something that we all hear from folks, right? Is that there's so much red tape in government, it takes forever to do stuff, and then by the time you fix it, the problem isn't there anymore, or it just, you know, the problem has changed. So I would like to be responsive and be flexible if there's something that we can do in the short term. However, I think, you know, doing the public engagement and all of that, I think can wait until we look at things more comprehensively as far as what we want to do downtown and Park Lane with some of those bigger changes.
Thank you. Councilmember Nixon, did you have your hand up first?
I did, and I just wanted to offer that Lynn does have the same list that I emailed to all of you. And what we could do is ask parks to come back to us with what they think could be done immediately by amending park rules, as opposed to by requiring city code amendments. Because the code amendments would take longer, but I think there may be some things we can do with rules immediately. And if Lynn could come back to us for our next meeting with that information, then that might be something we could do immediately. but some, and I don't know if, for example, the biggest issue seems to be the fairness of loud brass instruments versus quiet electronic piano, right? And if we could figure out how to at least address that fairness issue within the next couple of weeks, I think that would certainly help us. But I agree with Councilmember Falcone. Some of these issues are bigger issues that need longer study and public engagement.
Thank you. Councilmember Black.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I agree with everything that was just said. Starting actually with you, Madam Mayor, and then Councilmember Curtis, and then Councilmember Falcone and Council. I did have an ill-formed thought. That's what we like to call it on our council. An idea that they haven't spent a lot of time thinking about. And, that is that we, the extent, I know, I don't know if our assistant city manager, Jim Lopez, is on tonight's meeting, or
it's actually on vacation this week.
Ombudsman. And I know in his role as an ombudsman, he's typically reactive in the sense that we have a resident or someone who interfaces with our city, and he helps them nabigate maybe a concern they have with the city. But I wonder if ombudsmen ever, or ombudspersons ever in that role, take a proactive role, especially in resolving maybe a conflict that's fairly personal. That's not the entire scope of the problem that we are examining, certainly, but we also know that in our city, we do have some immediate individual conflict, and I just wondered if maybe our ombuds had a role in something like that. Again, ill-formed thought, but there's something we can discuss, I suppose.
I think that would absolutely fall within the scope of not just the ombud, but also the role of the deputy city manager for external affairs. So having a conversation between the various players and see whether there's something that can be mediated, I think is an excellent suggestion, whether or not you choose to do something else as well.
Great. So that's what happens when you miss a meeting. Okay, any further discussion?
So process-wise, Madam Mayor, just someone would need to make a motion to create action based on the legislative request memo, but I think with the exception of having the deputy city manager talk to the folks, I think we could do that without a motion. But if there's some other action the council would like to see, we need a motion.
Got it. Councilmember Nixon.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move that we accept the legislative request memo selecting option 4, which is the longer term engagement and study, but also ask the staff to see if we can identify specific items that could be done in the near term this summer.
Okay. It's been moved by Councilmember Nixon, seconded by Councilmember Falcone to accept option 4 with the modification that he described. Any further discussion? Question is on the motion to City Manager.
So just make sure I want to clarify that that's also from the discussion of that. So the bulk of that work should be later.
Yes.
Correct.
Longer term process. Okay, thank you.
Okay, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. This takes us to the East Rail Regional Advisory Council draft memorandum.
Okay. So thank you, Madam Mayor. So this is on behalf of Deputy Mayor Arnold, who is not with us today, who's also the Vice Chair of the Regional Advisory Committee. And so they are having a meeting on the 19th of July before your next council meeting on the 20th, and they're going to be discussing this MOU. The RAC processes, they might make a recommendation that it go back to all the RAC members for adoption. So Deputy Mayor Arnold, just wanted to see if any council members had any questions or thoughts or concerns that you wanted to share with him prior to him going to that meeting on the 19th. And then a final MOU, assuming the RAC approved it, would come back to the council for discussion and adoption formally. But this is your opportunity to have any comments or questions you want to share.
I think everybody's pretty much supportive of this, of moving ahead with it. Okay?
All right, then I just have one other thing before I'll turn it back to the tabled item. So I have the legislative work group reconvening. I have a Cascade Waterline study session the council would like to see on one of the calendar agendas. We did receive a request from the Regional Homelessness Authority as to whether the council would be interested in having a presentation from that authority sometime later this fall, like late September, early October. Would the council be supportive of doing that?
Mm-hmm.
Great. So we'll get that on there as well.
Can I ask you, Kurt, to report on one other thing? We had that special meeting of the legislative work group where we talked about, oh shoot, where did I write it? The legislative priority coalition advocacy. Can you sum up our discussion?
Yeah, certainly. So the legislative work group met to basically evaluate how well did the priority coalition agenda process work, and was it something that we wanted to recommend to the full council to continue or modify. And we had a really thoughtful discussion. There was definitely some positives, but the conclusion of the work group and the staff was that the process itself was not different enough from the support agenda, but added significant amounts of time and stress to both the work group and the council, as well as the staff. And so I think the formal recommendation that will probably come to the council is that we don't do it that way in the future, but maybe we look at a slightly modified version of our support agenda. We felt that one of the biggest challenges was that it's too hard to know what the specifics of the legislation is early on. And so it's just, that was one of the issues that really was a challenge for the full council and took a lot of time. I think the other issue that we talked through was that one of the reasons it was somewhat successful is that most of the rest of our priority legislation was actually suspended because of decisions that we made. So we really didn't have an agenda ourselves that we were pushing. And we think that if we actually did have a legislative agenda in the more traditional way that we normally do with the priorities, we probably wouldn't have time for the priority coalition agenda. So we just wanted to share that. And of course, if the two council members who are on the committee want to add more to that, but that was the summary. And that was staff recommendation as well, and also the contract lobbyists were neutral on the issue. They said, obviously, they'll do whatever we want them to do. So,
thank you. Okay, I guess that takes us back to our tabled item. We have the substitute ordinance, and
Madam Mayor.
Councilmember Nixon.
Yes, I would like to move that we suspend the rules to allow for free-form discussion on the proposed substitute prior to a motion being made, so that we can work out a consensus on the language before we have to get into the formality of formally moving amendments and such.
I'll second.
Okay. It's been moved by Councilmember Nixon, seconded by Councilmember Black, to suspend the rules to allow us to have discussion of substitute ordinance 4762 prior to getting the formal motion on the floor. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Do you want to kick us off?
I think we need to vote on that to suspend the rules.
Of course. Sorry. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Now, do you want to start us off?
Well, I think the first thing we need to do is have the city attorney display the proposed substitute on the screen.
Oh, of course. I'm sorry. I've got it on another screen.
Oh, did it come out in email?
Yeah.
It might be good to put the Word file up on the screen so we can look at it together and possibly edit it.
Okay, Councilmember Nixon, stand by. I will. You caught me by surprise here. I'm going to try share my screen. It's on my desktop. See if I can find it.
Great.
Can you see that?
Yep. If you maximize it and then do view page width, then I think we'll be in good shape.
Oh, okay, you got it.
Maximizes the thing in the upper right, the square box next to the X, and then do view page width. Up on the menu at the top.
View page. Okay, yeah, hang on a second. One page?
No, page width. The third thing down, under one page.
Oh, there we go.
Oops.
Sorry.
There you go. Now maximize it. Now everybody in the world can see it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Nixon. And I was a little nervous because I did a couple of versions of this while you guys were taking care of other business in your reports, and there was a couple changes. I want to make sure I had the most recent version up, and this is the most recent version. So take it away. Or do you want me to explain it?
Yeah, if you'd like to explain what you're proposing.
Yeah, okay. All right. Well, the first change that I proposed based on your conversation was to, and this was based on a suggestion I just got from Lynn that was really helpful, is to 14360701, and it simply changes the civil penalty for the first violation of this section from $66 to $150. And then with the phrase except as otherwise provided for herein. And then Councilmember Nixon, where you had suggested, I amended subsection C to say that in addition to the fine of $150 per violation, provided, however, that the following escalating penalties shall apply to violations of this section. Little Roman numeral 1, an additional penalty of $200 for a second violation within the same calendar year as an initial violation, and 2, an additional penalty of $250 for a third or subsequent violation within the same calendar year as an initial violation. And those were the changes.
Well, to me, that looks good, except is it an additional penalty of 200 or a penalty of 200? Or would we say an additional penalty of 50 and then an additional penalty of 100? What do you think, Neil?
Neil, you're on mute.
The staff intent was that it's an additional $200 and then an additional $250.
Right.
So, but is it in addition to the 150, or it's just 200 for a second violation and 250 for a third or subsequent violation? It's the word additional that I'm wondering about.
Yeah, I guess my quick reaction is it's a really good question. I'm scratching my head about it too. But I think if we set an additional penalty of $50 for a second violation, it would, $50 would come in and not the 200 that we were expecting. So
yeah, okay.
I'm sure it's possible to write this more clearly, but maybe not very simply.
Councilmember Black, did you have a comment?
No, I think city attorney came to the same conclusion I did, which is I think it is an additional penalty of 200 because we do want to the additional penalty is what we mean is your second violation is $200.
$200 total.
And your third violation in the same year is $250, and your fourth is $250.
Right.
And if you've done it 3 times in 1 year, it's going to be $250, $450, $550, $700.
No, I think the way
I think
the way it reads is it's just $250 for the third and subsequent violations. So it flattens out at $250 after that.
Right. But I mean, you would pay $150 the first violation, and then if there was a second violation, you'd pay another $200, and if there was a third violation, you'd pay another $250. So if you had 3 violations in the calendar year, it would be $150 plus $200 plus $250.
Right.
Moving in the direction potentially of impoundment, as Kevin Ball pointed out.
It's just not additional, meaning added to the 150. Right. It's 200. It's an additional 200 on the second violation, but it's still just 200, not 350.
I think the word additional is wrong.
Yeah. sorry to jump in. But since I already spoke once and said I thought I agreed with City Attorney, now on further reflection, I'm agreeing with Councilmember Nixon and I guess maybe the mayor. I think it is a penalty of $200 for a second violation.
And so eliminate 2 additionals?
So
Yeah.
eliminate 2 additionals, that's right.
It'd be, yeah.
A penalty. And then Madam Mayor, when you're ready, I have another suggestion. Unless Councilmember Nixon had the floor, I think.
I'm good. Well, I moved to suspend the rules, so the rules are suspended. We can do whatever we want, right?
That's right.
Well, can I ask the city attorney to scroll up to subsections 2 and 3? And unfortunately, they don't appear on the same page. Since we want the escalation to apply to 2 and 3, I think we want to use the same language. We want to say the civil penalty shall be $150 except as otherwise provided in this chapter, which is the same language we use in subsection 1.
Yes.
Good catch.
Except as otherwise provided for herein is fine too, I suppose. We might as well use the same.
So you just want
Yeah, I think the city attorney has it.
got it.
I know how I
Since
type.
we suspended the rules, I can just call him Kevin.
Oh, please.
And then once more in paragraph 2. And then I think this works for me.
Except I can't type. There we go.
Okay. Did I see your hand, Mrs. Curtis?
Yeah. Madam Mayor, Lynn had her hand up at some point. I just want to make sure that she's comfortable with all of this.
Yes, that was what I was going to suggest. Thank you.
Oh, those two additions? Excellent. Sorry, Lynn, you fell off my camera.
Yeah.
Okay, any further discussion, council? Seeing none, can I get a motion?
Madam
Sure.
Mayor,
Oh, go ahead.
whichever of us. Madam Mayor, I move that we adopt substitute ordinance 4762.
I'll second.
It's been moved by Councilmember Nixon, seconded by Councilmember Black to adopt substitute ordinance 4762. Any discussion? Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Councilmember Nixon?
Yes.
Councilmember Black?
Yes.
Councilmember Curtis?
Yes.
Councilmember Falcone?
Yes.
Councilmember Pascal?
Yes.
Mayor Sweet?
Yes. Ordinance carries unanimously. Okay, this takes us to item number 11, items from the audience. One more time, this is an additional time in our meeting when we normally can hear from the public on matters which are not quasi-judicial or otherwise scheduled for public hearing on our agenda, and assuming the rest of our meeting has been concluded before 10 p.m. Is there anyone from the public that wishes to make comments now via Zoom or telephone? Participants therefore should dial *9 to be recognized to speak from the phone, and Zoom participants should click in the participants box to raise your hand. Do we have any participants at this time?
We do have participants, but we don't have anyone who has yet raised their hand to speak.
Okay.
So, no one indicating they want to speak, Madam Mayor.
Okay, seeing none, I'm going to declare this items from the audience session complete. And with that, I believe we are done. And this meeting is adjourned. Congratulations, everybody. Thanks so much.